Dearest fantasy readers, welcome to the Dear Fantasy Reader podcast, where two best friends, Hannah and Karen, travel through the pages of our favorite romantasy novels. Join us as we take flight into the world of the Empyrean series, diving deep into the chapters exploring characters, scenes, theories, foreshadowing, and more, taking what we've learned from the second book, Iron Flame, to reread and re-experience the first as we count down to the release of Onyx Storm.
With that content warning and spoiler alert, we will be covering anything and everything Empyrean series to this date and any content Rebecca Yarros has given us. Also, due to the nature of these books, this podcast is rated R in content and in language.
As Rebecca Yarros says, readers who may be sensitive to these elements, please take note and prepare to enter Basgiath War College. We have so much to catch up on before we dive right in. First, we have a new Discord group chat where we can continue the conversations, theories, giveaways, and fun. You can find the link to join down in our show notes. We're trying to get the word out about our podcast because if people don't know about it, then they can't listen. So if you'd like to help us do that, please leave us a review wherever you're listening from. Reviews go so far. We just got our first the other day, and it means the world, so thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to start a new thing called our Rebecca Yarros Archives section, where we include any new announcements or info that Rebecca gives us as we gear up for Onyx Storm's release over the next few months, starting with this huge announcement from Rebecca herself. So since we last filmed, Rebecca has announced a paperback version of Fourth Wing with gorgeous sprayed edges that will release on September 17th, just 2 weeks away from the day this episode drops. So you can go ahead and pre-order. We will drop the link for that into the show notes. But that is not all. It will also include both Xaden POVs, Chapter 9 and 16, which we're going over in this episode, and the last one that we'd filmed the day before this dropped was the 9th. Crazy. It includes a brand new chapter from Xaden's point of view.
I don't know how to process all this.
I think we might have manifestation signets.
You do, for sure.
We are going to do a bonus episode, though, to talk more in depth about what chapters and insights we hope to get from that chapter specifically. Signets, wink, wink. And we'll leave it at that. If you have any chapters that you are dying to see, please send them in our Discord, leave a comment, let us know, because we are going to be really thinking over this before we make that bonus episode. And I'm really interested to see what chapters other people would be interested to see. So also, we just have a lot of housekeeping things today. Trying to catch up. We need to add an addendum to episode 4. So one of our dearest fantasy readers reached out and let us know that Brennan can mend himself, as he mentioned so in Iron Flame. Thank you. Like we said, we may get things wrong. There is so much to know and remember about this book. But we will always make sure to correct them as we realize it, and this is part of the fun in being able to connect with you all and build on each other's thoughts and memories. A quick note, though, about this information is that it doesn't mean that all menders can heal themselves, as Brennan is supposed to be the greatest of his time, and this might actually be what makes a mender one of the greatest, differentiates what makes them great. But we will discuss this more over on Discord and in future episodes. Now, time for a quick refresh of chapters 13 through 16 and chapter 16, Xaden's version, from our personal scribe informant, Karen.
It is officially threshing. Violet and her squad split up as they enter the valley where dragons will be flying around and bonding cadets, officially making them riders. Violet spots a tree in the valley and climbs it to get a better view, catching a flash of the golden feathertail. She hears the voices of none other than Jack Barlow, Tynan, and Orin discussing their plan to kill the Golden Feathertail for being weak. She obviously cannot let this happen and decides to step in to warn the Golden Dragon. When she finds it, the dragon seems oblivious to the danger it is in and does not take Violet's advice to leave. The boys find Violet with the Golden Dragon and are poised to attack when all of a sudden, Xaden demands from across the field that they should rethink their plan. Knowing that Xaden cannot step in, Jack attacks Violet, but she quickly defends herself, forcing him to run away. Tynan manages to injure Violet's arm before Xaden warns her of Orin's attack by narrating, not interfering, which gives Violet enough time to knock Orin unconscious. Just as Tynan is going to attack again, the huge black unbonded dragon Professor Kaori told them about appears and incinerates Tynan. The dragon speaks directly to Violet, his voice entering her head, and she realizes that he has chosen her as his rider. Violet is worried about the Golden Feathertail being attacked again if they leave, but it flies away, proving it could have left the attack by Jack, Orin, and Tynan at any time. The black dragon creates a ramp for Violet to mount him. But wait, dragons never supplicate for humans. Once Violet is seated, the dragon tells her his name, Ternanak, but she may call him Tern. He chose her because she saved the Golden Feathertail. She's the smartest and most cunning of her year, and for her strength of courage. They land in a field among the other newly bonded riders, those from years past, and the Golden Feathertail. Violet approaches the roll keeper and tells her Terran's name, when the Golden Feathertail interjects Violet's thought, Endarna Urim, or Endarna for short. Violet has officially bonded 2 dragons. Chaos erupts and the generals argue on whether this is allowed. Meanwhile, Jack confronts Violet again, but is warned by Professor Kaori that Terran will attack if he takes a step towards Violet. He is clearly jealous of Violet's dragon and storms off. Professor Kaori explains that the Dragon Council is meeting to determine whether she can stay bonded to both Terran and Endarna, as humans have no say in bonding choices. Dane finds Violet and tells her she has to choose one dragon, Endarna, because Terran and Sigale are a mated pair. This officially ties Violet to Xaden for life, as mated pairs can't be separated for long. But it also ties Violet to Xaden's life, as Terran bonds so strongly. If Violet dies, so could Sigale and Xaden. Dane accuses Xaden of manipulating threshing, and Xaden reveals that Dane would follow the rules rather than interfere to save Violet's life. He warns Violet that the unbonded riders are likely to try to kill her in hopes that they'll get Terran to bond to them. General Melgren announces that there has never been a case of 2 dragons selecting the same rider, so there is no dragon law against it. Therefore, both Terran and Endarna's choice to bond Violet withstands. Xaden discusses his plans to assign his foster brother, Liam, as Violet's bodyguard to keep her safe. After receiving her relic from both her dragons, Dane kisses Violet. Xaden witnesses this from across the field and loses his cool, much to Garrick's amusement. For a moment, Violet delights in the kiss that she has waited years for, before realizing that she no longer wants it.
Great job, Karen, on the summary. It's hard to take everything and condense it down. So much happens. But drum roll, cadets, as we are officially bonding a dragon. Or 2? This is our analysis and discussion section where we walk through the major plot points and moments in this section of chapters. We will be sprinkling in a few moments of foreshadowing and light theories throughout, but most of that will be saved for our foreshadowing and theories section. So buckle up. Threshing is one of the most important days for the 147 first-year cadets who have survived this far, as this is where they get the direct opportunity to bond one of the 101 dragons, counting Andarna, that have agreed to bond this year. This happens on October 1st of each year, and if a cadet does not bond a dragon, they either wait until a new rider dies before their bond is strengthened, or they have to repeat their first year like Sawyer, or they die. They'll just eventually die off somehow. You never get to not pursue, become a rider, either death or rider eventually. These are the only options. So threshing takes place in this bowl-shaped forested valley they also call the fields beneath the citadel at Basgiath, which is super important thinking of the placement of Basgiath and its relation to the Vale. The second and third year riders basically supervise from the sidelines and are not allowed to interfere or intervene in the process, which is basically like a free-for-all for all of the first years to kill each other.
It is very intense, but I am so excited that we are finally able to get to this point of the book, because it brings us some of our favorite characters, and it forces proximity between Violet and Xaden, which you guys know we love all too well.
Oh, I cannot wait to get to the forced proximity of it all. So Professor Kaori tells the cadets that they will feel drawn to the location of their dragons if they have been selected, and to listen to their intuition if they feel like they should go in a direction away from a dragon that's not theirs. Violet wanders for hours, coming across many dragons, one that keeps moving, ones that fly off with new riders, and one that she feels the urge to get away from, but thinks to herself that she never feels drawn to or connected to a dragon that would have selected her. And as I was rereading this, I wondered if this was to show that no dragon planned to bond her at all, feeding into the questions I've seen others ask about whether she would have bonded a dragon if Taryn never showed up, which is my first impression when I first read Fourth Wing alone. But then I remembered, with context from Iron Flame, that Andarna was always intending to bond Violet, at least in this section of time. In fact, she had selected her years ago, which we'll come back to later in this episode. So then I wondered why Violet never felt that connection to Andarna, even when she first saw a glint of her in the clearing before running into Jack, Tynan, and Oren. She never had that pull to her. So I went back to what Professor Kaori said, and he specifically stated that if a dragon has already selected you, quote unquote, they'll be calling. So this means that even though Andarna had selected Violet to bond, she did not call for her. So that pull from a dragon that selected a rider is intentional on the dragon's part. I think that this is because Andarna wanted Violet to find her and make these decisions naturally, but also could be because Andarna knew Violet would find her on her own and save her, which we will come back to later in this episode because I have a theory on that.
Ooh, I am wondering, when it comes to Andarna picking Violet years and years ago, did she actually pick Violet Soaringale knowing that she was going to be the specific person? I'm talking before Violet was born. Did Andarna know that this person was going to be Violet Soaringale? Or did she pick the person who would prevent her being attacked, almost like Violet was fulfilling a prophecy?
Okay. So that is actually the part that I was saying we would come back to, because I have a feeling that there is a prophecy or some sort of precognition thing going on here, and we will get to that. And look at what Andarna specifically says to address if she knew it was Violet years back or only in the last couple years. We pull that quote. We'll talk about that later. But it's really cool that that's where your mind went to, because I've got some theories. Back to threshing. So Violet comes across Jack and Tynan and Oren, who are hunting Andarna, though both myself and Violet initially thought that the quote-unquote freak that they were hunting was her. Like, I didn't realize that they were really going after Andarna, which again shows that parallel that, like, we're so used to them talking about Violet this way, but then they've started using that similar language on Andarna, which shows that parallel on how they're perceived similarly. So they're horrifically hunting down this little dragon, and Jack so arrogantly says, "It's not like our dragons are going to bond other riders. They'll wait for us." Meanwhile, Violet's worried about any dragon bonding her at all because she knows that the role is on behalf of the dragons. It's not up to the riders. It's crazy. And it's also crazy to me because apparently he's not wrong. Because he does end up bonding a dragon, he ends up bonding Bade, even though he ran from a fight that he initiated, which is crazy, considering you'd think that in itself would be enough for a dragon to not want to bond him, but even crazier that it was because he was trying to kill a Feathertail, which I would think a dragon would incinerate him for, much less pick him to bond to.
I still don't understand how he was able to bond at all, or why a different dragon didn't incinerate him when they found out about Andarna. I don't get it. But Jack also says in this moment that scrawny one is going to get someone killed. But since when does Jack care if anyone besides himself dies? Now, I have a thought about this. Do you think that Jack was being truthful about Andarna getting someone killed? Or do you think he was just having a little evil moment? Because what I think is that Jack got scared that the small dragon would pick him and he would be stuck with the weaker dragon.
I've never thought of that. Okay, so you're saying that he wanted to kill Andarna because he was afraid that the one that couldn't fly, had paws, those tiny, would be not as powerful as he would want. So he was trying to take her out before she had the chance to bond him. You know what? He's pretentious enough that he would have been like, "Oh yeah, every dragon out here is going to want to bond me. So gotta lower the chance."
Yeah, I think he was scared. I think he was just being like, I need more power and I can't risk this one wanting me.
Yeah, well, I said pretentious. It's not quite the word. It's arrogance. And arrogance. That fits him. Yeah, it fits him so well. I know that Rebecca has said in an interview recently or a panel that we will get more of Jack's backstory and why he is the way he is. So I wonder if we will get any hints to that. That's so interesting to think about.
After hearing the boys plotting to kill Andarna, Violet thinks, I can't just stand there and do nothing. And this is just such a huge testament to Violet's character and shows who she is and just shows her values throughout this entire series.
It does. And I thought in that moment, what could she do? She can't fight off all these 3 trained warriors. So she does the honorable thing and thinks to go warn the little dragon, who can then just fly off, right? And then figure it out from there, because she is still putting herself in a bad spot. But maybe she can get to Andarna first, tell her she can fly off, and then Violet can hide. But no, interestingly enough, Andarna does not listen to her, and she just stays there staring at Violet, basically eating up the time they would have had to escape. Again, we'll come back to that. But then we find out she cannot breathe fire, and she doesn't have claws. She has paws. And all I could picture when I first read this, and I just got flashbacks while I was reading it again in this scene, is a cartoon. It's almost like the 2D cartoon, My Little Pony, is what I picture when I think of Andarna as this cute little gold Feathertail. With paws. But then I in my mind is not very creative, because at the same time I'm thinking of this very 4D dragon that is Tarn, that is scarier than any dragon I've seen on TV. So I don't know how my brain rationalizes that. It's changed since she's no longer a Feathertail. But baby Andarna to me is a My Little Pony.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
She would hate me for that and probably incinerate me, but
100%.
Now, again, Andarna could have flown off, but she doesn't. And she says to Violet later that, quote unquote, maybe I was saving you, because she knew if she flew off, Jack and his posse would try to kill Violet, maybe? I don't know. Again, I have a theory that we'll come back to. we'll come back to.
I love that Andarna said this to Violet. Question though, could it be foreshadowing how Andarna will help save Violet in the future, not just in this moment?
Yeah, I don't know if I've thought about that. I mean, it sounds like she really does think like in that moment it was saving her, and I don't see how that connects. But we have to remember she's saying this knowing that she was always going to bond. Like she had intended before Violet showed up in the clearing to bond her, so maybe it was foreshadowing that information. Like she stayed in there knowing. I think it comes back to my rationale is the unsaid part is that Jack and Tynan and Oren would have killed Violet. But
100%.
just to stand there and stare and then to say I was saving you, and she really like, yeah, she clamped her teeth once, but that's like all she did. So what did she do to save her?
And that's where my question came in, because
unless she knew that Taryn would show up.
Yeah.
But then she would have known the rules because they can talk to each other.
But also, you mentioned maybe some form of precognition. Maybe even before Taryn had made that decision to come in and help, maybe Andarna knew that would happen.
You're getting into my theory. You're getting into the
theory. I've been spending so much time with you.
Well, I mean, it's not a jump to think that that might be at play, especially with the way that she words other things and the other things that Andarna herself does. It really sets up for me to be like, there's too many spots here that like make me think. But again, we'll come back to it. So even when these 3 trained warriors are attacking her and the little golden dragon, Violet still doesn't go for the kill shot. She even refuses to kill Oren later since he is unconscious, which Taryn decides to let her make the call on and later regrets because Oren was one of the unbonded cadets that snuck into her room and tried to kill her. In fact, he was the one that held the knife to her throat. So Taryn comments on this later, basically saying like he would not make this mistake again of not killing someone who previously attacked her after.
Oh, listen, I love Violet for her heart, and I've said that a million times at this point. And part of her heart is not taking the kill shot, especially to her peers. But in doing so, this just keeps putting her in near-death situations.
Yep.
Which, like you just mentioned, we'll dive into that probably the next episode, I think.
Yeah. Guys, we are more than halfway through our first season. This is crazy. Like, we're almost through Fourth Wing, and then we're jumping into Iron Flame. And by the time we get halfway through that, we are going to be so close to getting Onyx Storm, like... Anyways, so yeah, we see this kind of kindness come back and bite her. And unfortunately, this does force her to harden a bit, which we see as we get through Iron Flame, and we will see the repercussions of, I'm sure, in Onyx Storm. On the topic of Taryn, we get this huge plot twist where Taryn swoops in right at the moment Xaden himself was about to step in and doesn't just defend Andarna here, but also Violet. He could have had no care for Violet, but she had stepped up and shown bravery and strength in defending the defenseless, essentially. And then he chooses Violet as his rider. I get chills every time I read this scene. I really enjoy being taken off guard and surprised, specifically with positive surprises. Rebecca, if you're listening. As I mentioned, I thought Taryn would bond her as soon as we were told about him in Dragon's class. But then I doubted this when we met the little golden dragon at presentation day. So that really helped to set up and make things less predictable. And this moment where Taryn first speaks into her mind, showing he bonded her, was so delicious to read.
Again, I had no idea on my first read that the massive black dragon that Professor Kaori showed in class was going to be the dragon that ended up choosing Violet. It was such a surprise. And then on my reread, I loved getting to dive in and just appreciate everything in the moment without having to wonder what was going to happen next, especially in a more stressful situation like threshing.
That's a really good point. And honestly, I think that that is what I'm most enjoying about this reread as well. Because, you know, like you said, when you're first reading it, you are like, just flipping through the pages, you're not hanging on to every word Rebecca Yarros is putting in there. You also don't quite know how much she enjoys a good Easter egg hunt. Like, she sprinkles it all throughout. So you're just like, oh, that's an interesting bit of information. Let me just focus on the plot. Whereas now I'm like reading every line and I'm like, oh my gosh, Rebecca, my episode is going to be like 3 hours long. These chapters have so much more than I recalled from even my first read. And I think every time you read it, you see more and more, which is what makes rereading it every time a totally new experience. And then when we get Onyx Storm, imagine the context there that will make this all a new read again. Incredible. I think that's one of my favorite parts of storytelling.
It's so good. And she does it so well.
She's become one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite, because of that. And, romantasy. So we also get insight into who this rare, black, unwilling to bond, second most powerful dragon we know of is. His name is Ternanok, and he is 100 years old, so middle-aged for dragonkind, and he has a club tail. Remember, they choose the kind of tails they want. Interesting choice. Very violent. He had not agreed to bond this year or any prior year since his rider before died 5 years ago in the Tirish Rebellion. So he's described as a monstrosity, as Xaden, one of the deadliest dragons in Navarre by Professor Kaori. And Violet says she doesn't even come close to reaching his ankle. And he is highly respected by the other dragons who pay deference to him for his size and power. He is known for being cunning and apparently quite sassy, but also extremely considerate of Violet and her need for accommodations, even though, quote-unquote, dragons never supplicate for anyone.
When rereading these chapters this week, I tried so hard to imagine only being tall enough to reach someone's ankles. Like, I kind of pictured Lady, because, she's an animal. Dragon's an animal. I tried to picture being only tall enough to reach Lady's ankles. And I was like, that's so scary, first of all. But it's impossible.
It is impossible, because if you just think of, like, an ankle is, like, one of the lowest points of reference on a body. Do dragons have knees? I don't know.
Somebody pull up a picture of a dragon.
Maybe it's not considered knees, maybe it's considered elbows, but then ankles wouldn't be ankles, they'd be wrists.
Yeah.
Do dragons have 2 hands and 2 feet, or is it all 4 feet?
Well, I don't have much context for dragons besides the movie How to Train Your Dragon, and they are 4-legged.
Honestly, on that topic, apparently that's one of the only TV shows that show an actual dragon and not a wyvern, because a wyvern has 2 legs. And so if you think of like Game of Thrones and House of Dragon, they're all wyvern. But something to point out on this point is like wyvern is a type of dragon. So it's still like the joke is House of Wyvern. Like people jokingly call it that. But a wyvern is still a type of dragon, but a dragon is not a type of wyvern. But then I'm wondering with the wyvern, would they only have 2 legs or 2 arms? Technically legs, because they need to stand.
Legs.
But like, I like think of like a T-Rex with a dragon, like they have hands. Okay, this is so we've gotten down a rabbit hole, but I'm actually very curious about that. I feel like I need to, this is my first dragons book. I'd never really felt like inclined. It always felt like a very like more masculine interest. I think most of the dragon fantasy books have been written by men.
Boo. Just kidding. I'm joking.
Well, I mean, we do. I mean, it's okay to say we prefer a female gaze, and I think I definitely do in my writing. I tend to go for stories like that. So I think that's what made me really interested in reading more about the series. Is I knew it was a female author. I didn't really know much about the book, but I'm really glad I did, because now I'm like, oh my God, I really liked House of Dragon, but now I watch House of Dragon season 2, which is not as good as season 1, by the way. Season 1, I was like, oh, cool dragons, but I was more obsessed with like Rhaenyra. But this season, I was like, oh my God, I like want more of the dragons. Like I become like actually crazed and want dragon content. Anyways, so all of that to say, I need to look up what they actually look like and if they have, clearly they have ankles, but where were we even at?
Oh, if any of you guys have any like good dragon fan art from this book, please send it to us because we obviously want to see it.
I found one specific image of Tarn that is fan art, and I'm going to send it to you. I don't think you can tell if he has like ankles, so it won't point out that part to us, but it is incredible, and that's what I picture. So I'll actually link that in the show notes in case. But if you find any others, please, send them to us.
Anyways, back to Taryn. Speaking of Taryn, I also love his consideration for Violet and that it's not something that is expected. Because like you said, they don't make supplications for humans, but it's so heartwarming to see. And again, I have to mention that we keep getting little tidbits of information about the dragons that say like, dragons never, dragons look for, but I just don't think that's actually true or known, and it's a lot of assumptions. But could dragons actually be doing this kind of stuff for a worthy rider? Because I just don't see Violet being the first person that's ever gotten supplications or help for this kind of stuff.
I mean, the way Rebecca positions it is like, yes, this is like this new unheard of thing, especially with how the dragons react. I recognized, again, in this reread, as Taryn lands in this field in front of all of the dragons, both bonded newly and in years past, and he bends his leg to make a ramp, all of them start gasping and murmuring. So it's very taboo. It is not like an accepted thing, but nobody's going to tell Taryn what to do and what not to do. It's just they're so caught off guard. And I think, to your point, though, we also have to remember that Navarre is the one that tells us everything we know about dragons. Like, the dragons themselves are very hush-hush about the inner workings and what is accepted and what's not. Like, we get some tidbits, but most of the information we have is from Navarre. And we know that they manipulate information about everything for their benefit. So who's to say they weren't doing that in some capacity when it comes to, like, what dragons are looking for or things like that? Yeah, I really can't wait to find out more about dragons as we get through these next 3 books that we have coming. So the first thing that Taryn says to Violet is, quote unquote, step aside, Silver One. This gives me chills every single time. I love this nickname for her. And I honestly just can't get enough of the fact that he also calls Andarna Golden One.
The Silver One and the Golden One. Andarna and Violet are just like Taryn's little puppies at this point. And I love it.
He's truly become my favorite character to read, tied with Xaden at moments. But he has such iconic and sassy lines. Just a few from this section. You're bleeding. Stop it. You're making us look bad. Stop it. Do tell me more about what I should value. And that's one way to do it. When Violet awkwardly dismounts from his back.
Oh, totally agree. I love his sass so much and his bluntness and sarcasm.
I was so unprepared for it.
It's so good. Did Rebecca Yarros say that she based Taryn off someone in her life? I don't remember the exact quote.
That's actually, I didn't realize it was coming up so soon, but yes, that is actually what I was going to say. You made an interesting comparison there with the puppies thing, because she has said on a panel that she based Taryn off of her English bulldog Diesel. And she has a second dog. I don't know the name of that dog, but that is who Andarna is based off of, or at least their dynamic. Unfortunately, Diesel passed away before they published Fourth Wing at 12 and a half years old, which she says is really old for an English bulldog. So long, happy life. But she said that they brought a puppy home to him and he was mad and had this like get off my lawn energy about him. And so Taryn was inspired by this. That's where you get like the sassiness from. She also said, in explaining who Taryn is and his perspective, is, dude, he's just had it because the guy is 100 years old and he didn't want to bond. And he has to because Andarna, now he's bonded to this girl and she's like 20 and he's sick of the drama. Also, another fun fact is that Taryn's name translates to thunder in Scottish Gaelic.
Okay.
Now, I know, okay, lightning wielder. Thunder,
lightning.
right. Now, there's been some critique of Rebecca's use and pronunciation of the Scottish Gaelic words because Rebecca pronounces it Tairn, but in Gaelic, it's Tarn. There is actually a common misconception that it is Irish Gaelic that she has pulled inspiration from, or I don't know if at this point you could say inspiration so much as she pulled literally the words. It is actually Scottish Gaelic. And the critique is that Rebecca should have looked up how to properly pronounce the names she's using from another culture. There is also some deep-rooted history that I was unaware of where people were persecuted for speaking Scottish Gaelic. And it is considered to this day an endangered language. So I get it. She should have looked up how to properly pronounce it before choosing those names. We will be using her pronunciation, but I think it's important context to have and to be aware of. So Taryn's name translates to thunder, which is super cool. And scale translates to shadow.
Wait, really?
So, I don't put stock into it being like a reliable method for predicting signets since his last writer was a siphon and had nothing to do with thunder. And not all of the names of the dragons translate that directly, which we'll get to in a Dragons bonus episode. But also, a signet is about the unique bond between a dragon and a rider. But again, it's a writing tool that I think is really, really cool that she used. I also want to talk about how freaking cool it is that they can communicate telepathically and that the dragon can always read the rider's mind if they're not shielding, but that the rider only gets the information from the dragon that the dragon wants them to. Like, the rider is not always in the dragon's mind, so it is not a mutually shared experience. It is the dragons still have the power in this situation. This is really fun to read. Honestly, I've said this before, but I would love to read this from a dragon's perspective too. It's also really another cool storytelling tool for the author because you can have your character communicate in really unique ways. We see this in several ways, including during battle, where Violet comes up with this plan in her thoughts, but they aren't italicized, and Taryn just says, I'm on it. They're essentially synced together as one, and I really hope and think that this could even improve the longer that they're bonded. In later books, will this be like a second nature thing to them to just know how to fight together, especially as Violet gets more experienced with her signets and the extent of her abilities? Fight scenes will be incredible to read.
Oh, I cannot wait to see that dynamic play out. I'm very excited about that. I agree with you. I definitely agree with you that it would be super cool. But as somebody who is easily overwhelmed by a lot of noise and commotion happening at once, I feel like just hearing my dragon's thought in my head would have me freaking out like the kid we'll see in upcoming chapters because he couldn't handle all the thoughts and he just freaked out. That would be me with just me and a dragon.
I've had the honor of bonding a dragon, and they wanted to be in my mind. Like, who cares about anything else? I don't need to function. I've bonded a dragon. Like, nothing else in my life matters anymore. I don't know. I would just love it. I think all the time after I read this book, I have two cats, Oliver and Stassi is a much smaller version of Oliver, basically. They're both ragdolls. And I just kept thinking, like, first of all, I see Tiernan and Darna in both of them, and I just wish that they could communicate with me telepathically. Like, I think that would be so cool. But anyways.
I mean, okay, I would also love to hear Lady, my dog's thoughts.
See?
But only if I could turn them off, because I feel like she is probably thinking mean things about me sometimes.
Well, you just have to get really good at shielding.
True.
We do have to talk about this highly discussed line. I know exactly who and what you are, Violet Sorengale. Oh, so on first impression, this is him trying to explain to Violet why he chose her, that she is strong in so many ways and that he already knows this about her. He knows who she is. It's the wording of the what she is that people speculate on fairly. And yes, it could be taken as strong is what she is. But I've seen others use this reasoning for why they think that she is part Venin and that Taryn knows this.
Ooh, chills whenever he says that he knows who and what she is. Now, I do not believe that this indicates that she is part Venin.
Yeah, I agree. That wording itself is suspicious, but I don't think Violet is half Venin either. It's not a breed. I think it was him referring to her saying that she isn't strong, and he says he knows exactly what she is. I think that's the what.
Yeah.
Now, Taryn explains to Vi that he chose to bond in that moment, quote, because you saved her, talking about Violet saving Andarna, and strength of courage is more important than physical strength, since you apparently need to know before we land. This is crazy because on one hand, I love his communication skills, but on the other, this tells us that Taryn decided in the moment to bond Violet, knowing how messy it could get with Xaden, even though he was basically living his best life in retirement. But we'll come back to that.
Oh, I love that. Just imagining him, Taryn, retired. Oh, they then take off flying, but Violet is not strong enough to hold her seat and falls to what she thinks is her death. But lo and behold, Taryn saves her life by catching her in his claws. This, again, is crazy because we are told that dragons never make accommodations for their riders, especially ones that they just bonded. We actually see another cadet fall to their death because they couldn't hold their seat.
Which comes in big time with why it's so important that Violet will need this saddle and to take this accommodation, because it's so easy for them to just fall off. And that we see, like, even one of Violet's squad mates doesn't make it, even though they were found worthy by a dragon. It's just, again, another opportunity also to show the stakes. And then it's not just Navarre that is kind of ruthless about that, right? It's also the dragons. They're like, oh, you fell off? But Taryn is luckily not like that.
Yeah, we love him for that.
We do. So Violet approaches the roll keeper to tell them that Taryn has chosen her. It's custom for the rider to say the full name of their dragon, cementing that they know it, which indicates that they have in fact bonded.
Yeah.
So everyone is in shock that Violet bonded this legend of a dragon that, remember, is touted to have won Navarre the rebellion. And all of a sudden, this sweet, high voice of the golden dragon says, Andarna Urim, Andarna for short. When I tell you, I gasped and may or may not have squealed.
Oh my gosh, me too. Oh, and you mentioned before that Andarna was not originally part of this book. And truly, I don't believe that this book would have worked without her, because moments like this, oh, it's such a good moment.
I think it really makes it. And again, it actually added a tool of like that element of surprise of like, which one is it for those who may have picked out that it would have been one of them? You do get both. And I'm like, I didn't even know that was like an option. But I guess if you're writing this like fantasy world, why isn't everything on board? Like, why can't she have 5, you know?
Yeah.
I get it. But so our darling Andarna, let's start with what we know about her in Fourth Wing. She is a 2-year-old feathertail, and we later find out that all feathertails are golden. And her parents passed before she hatched, which at that time we thought was recently. Taryn and Sigale have quite literally taken her under their wing. She is too small to bear a rider, and she has the unique feathertail ability, eventually, to freeze or slow time. Now, Karen, I don't know if you knew this, but Andarna's name translates to second honor.
Shut up.
I'm not joking. Is that not the sweetest, most sentimental? Because she is the first honor was Taryn. Right? He bonded. Yeah. And then we find out that she is the second honor. First of all, I want to point out that like I'm really impressed by these names.
Yeah.
And I really thought they were picked specifically for the way that they sound. I know that it's Rebecca's interpretation of the way that they sound, but I really like the way that they sound like in my head, and they match the characters so well for that.
Yeah.
So for Indarna, which is really unique and fits her so well, for that to also have been chosen because of the meaning and not because of how Rebecca first interpreted the name to sound on her tongue, that to me is so, so cool. I love, that's my favorite name translation.
Oh, yeah. And I did not know any of the name translations before, and I love it. I'm kind of glad I didn't know before, because I would have tried to speculate while reading the book, and it's just really cool to know afterwards that there's Easter eggs that we're just missing.
Fortunately, that one wouldn't have been, but Terrence would have been a spoiler. And Darna, though, we don't know her name until right now when we know she's chosen her, right? So we only got Golden Feathertail. But, like, I'm so glad on that point that we didn't know what Terran's name translated to, because I wanted to find out in the moment what her signet would be. Yeah. I'm also really glad that whatever Violet's second signet is not connected to Indarna's name. Otherwise, yeah, that would have been a spoiler.
Yeah.
Really quick, I want to show you what I got, because I saved this moment specifically to show you in real time.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Wait, it's so cute.
So for those listening and not watching on YouTube or Spotify, I found on Etsy this 3D printed golden dragon. It is Indarna, and she has the cutest little eyes, and she moves. Like, I've seen these before, but this was someone painted her.
Oh,
is it not the most precious thing? So I have her sitting on my fourth wing collection back here.
Oh, she reminds me of Lady.
She has the little eyes of my cats.
Oh.
The, like,
oh my gosh, I
Disney
love that.
eyes.
Yeah.
So every time I look back there, I'm like, oh, I have Indarna. It's so cute. Okay, we'll link. That is not a sponsored thing. I just really loved it. But for those that I'm sure will think she's also adorable and will want her as well, we'll link it in the show notes.
I want it.
So she was actually like only like $20 or something like that. Like, so cute. Anyways, we got so much more context in Iron Flame that makes Indarna's bond even more special than we initially thought. So in Iron Flame, Indarna tells Violet, quote, "I waited 650 years to hatch. Waited until your 18th summer, when I heard our elders talk of the weakling daughter of their general, the girl forecasted to become the head of the scribes, and I knew. You would have the mind of a scribe and the heart of a writer. You would be mine." So Indarna only hatched when she heard of Violet and knew from that moment that she would bond her. So you had a question earlier on this.
Yes. So I was wondering if Indarna had known the entire 600 years that Violet Sorrengail specifically would be the person she chose, or if she was going to choose a person who fit a prophecy and Violet just happened to be the one to fulfill it.
I am almost convinced that there is some sort of prophecy, especially here with the way Indarna worded, "The girl forecasted to become the head of the scribes, and I knew you would have the mind of a scribe and the heart of a writer. You would be mine." That sounds like almost like Indarna had been told, you will bond the one with a mind of a scribe and the heart of a writer. That alone, the way it's worded, that sounds like a prophecy.
Right.
And it's like that's the prophecy that Indarna was told. So when she heard of this person that was forecasted to be the head of the scribes, i.e. the mind of a scribe and a heart of a writer, that's what told her that's who you're going to bond. So to your question, both if this was the case or even if it's not, it wasn't until Indarna heard of this unnamed girl, the daughter of the general, as she puts it. She doesn't say Violet Sorrengail. She says the daughter of the general, that Indarna knew she would bond her. So not all 650 years. But if the prophecy theory is not true, then I have another theory for how Andarna would have known to wait and hatch at this specific time. I think that Andarna may have the unique dragon gift, because we know that some of them have one, of precognition, which you had hinted at earlier, so there's not like as much surprise as I thought there. You connected that. So here's my thought process.
Okay.
How else would Andarna know that Violet would not become a scribe when she says herself that what she overheard was that Violet was forecast to become the head of the scribes? So how would she know that Violet would become a writer, that she would even be able to bond to and not a scribe like she was expected to be? No one knew that, unless there was a prophecy that we don't know about yet. This would make a lot of sense, considering that Andarna has always seemed to be in the right place at the right time when she's needed, and even pushes back when Violet tells her to like hide or leave, saying, quote, "I will be where you need me." How does she know where to be and when Violet will specifically need her? It would also make sense why she did not fly off when Violet first warned her. She didn't do anything to actually protect Violet from being killed. Like she says, maybe I saved you, except for snap her teeth once. So maybe she knew how things would play out if she didn't fly off. And that in a way was a version of her saving her.
Oh my gosh. I think that this theory that you have is, I believe it. And I did not know you were going to tell me this theory. And whenever I kind of mentioned that, I was just kind of guessing. I didn't actually think that theory through. So hearing your full theory about this, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like I kind of wondered this as I was reading Iron Flame. I was so caught off with like, oh my God, 650 years that I wasn't paying attention to like the implications of what she was saying so much as like the meaning and the sentiment behind it. Because like, oh my God, she like really, she waited for her. And then like a heart of a writer and a mind of a scribe, like all of that is what I was focused on. But when you start to think about this, I really thought more that it would be some sort of like her being able to do that whole iridescent, like incognito blend in kind of thing. Either way, I'm convinced she has a gift. I'm convinced Andarna has a dragon gift. But this is the only thing that like makes all of those various dominoes align and make sense. It seems like she, in some capacity, can see the future or has some sense of like heightened intuition. And we know that dragons can have a unique gift, but we really don't know if they like hatch that way. I say like not born that way, like if they've got it already in the egg. Or if that comes along later in life. My understanding was that dragons develop it later, since feathertails have a separate unique gift that's temporary. But we really haven't been told that directly. And it could be that they have their lifelong unique one from the moment they're conceived, since Andarna was able to do it in the egg before she hatched. And that one never leaves them. Like that's their lifelong gift. Or it could be unique to Andarna being the seventh breed specifically, like maybe the seventh breed can have their gift like from conception and on. We will come back to this in Iron Flame, but Warwick's journal specifically says the 6 and the 1 combined in reference to what dragons are needed to light the wards. And we're told that Warwick altered the wording so that others couldn't raise the wards, which is why Lyra's actually says the 7. But what if Andarna is the 1 combined? She is combined with something else other than dragon that gives her an even more unique gift than the typical dragon gift.
I don't know how your brain does this. Wow.
So while I'm really close to convinced of this, I do doubt it. But either way, the precognition or even this like and Darna being able to have like a super special gift even more than other dragons, because Rebecca Yarros has said she doesn't like overpowered heroines and wanted Andarna and Tarn to contrast for balance. She didn't explain like what she means by that, but she has made a comment that we'll get to later that like really makes me think this is not what she's going for. I assume what she means is that in their physical strength and level of power, but I'm not sure. I do think Andarna could have like a limited precognition gift, like heightened intuition that would still keep it balanced from not having like these two superly powerful dragons for one single rider. Yeah. But anything more than that might be overpowered.
Even if Andarna has precognition, Violet doesn't have it, so she wouldn't be an overpowered individual. She would have access to that power, possibly, but so maybe
she could get away with it. I'm just trying to think of like the logic for Rebecca's decision making, especially considering Andarna like technically wasn't initially even in her like thoughts for the plot. Also, and again, this is like definitely theories territory and did not mean to like rabbit hole at this point, but here we are. Let's go for it. I also think that this whole like 18th summer part of Andarna's information here is that would be the time frame for Violet's dad when he was conducting his Feathertail research. So was it really the elders that she had heard this from about Violet being the forecasted next head of the scribes and her being on track to become a scribe from, or was it Violet's dad?
That was the first thing that popped in my head whenever you mentioned that. That was when the timing lines up was, oh, did she actually hear about Violet from her dad? Because how would the elders know that she had the heart of a rider? That's something a parent would know.
Why were the elders talking about the daughter of the general? So what if she was forecasted to be the head of the scribes? That implies there's so much, like, for the Dragon's Council, basically, like the elders to all be gossiping about little old Violet.
Yeah.
Like, I, again, think it was a prophecy.
Yeah.
I think it was either a prophecy or it was Violet's dad. But I tend to want to believe Andarna when she says she heard it from elders. Like, I think she would have said she just heard it.
What if she didn't know it was Violet's dad? What if her dad was talking to elders or something while he was researching the Feathertails?
There's this huge connection between her dad and the Feathertails. And it comes in, it's got to come in like a lot of significant ways.
Yeah.
And that just could be one of them. One last thing on the point about the significance of this. As far as we know, Andarna is the first ever dragon to select a human to bond before presentation day, before the human even joins the quadrant, and much less while they themselves are in an egg.
I hadn't really thought about this, but that's crazy. And obviously, Violet is our main character, but this really shows how significant Violet is going to be to the revolution and whatever else is to come.
Yeah, I think I've convinced myself it's a prophecy. Yeah. Even this aspect of it, this is so unique. It's like, okay, yes, main character, but this is a bit far to not have some other significance. Because why would just this dragon and an egg be like, that's the one I want? Also, they're just like fully conscious and can hear
egg
and can make these like huge decisions and know all about like how she will eventually bond to human as an egg
and decide when she wants to hatch from this egg.
Like, that's kind of like crazy information to drop. We know so little about how dragons function. That in itself is kind of like a mind-blowing aspect to how they function and how like, whew. All right. I mean, at that point, she's like 648 years, you know?
She's technically older than Tarn.
Yeah. conceptually.
Yeah. Wow.
I wonder if that's going to be one of her sassy comments now that Taryn knows. So anyways, let's get back to the most shocking part of a first read, that Violet has bonded 2 dragons. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the bonds individually, but like that as a concept is huge. Now, we've talked about this before, but I told you all I would give you a full quote when we got to threshing. So, according to Skyfall Scotland on Tumblr, who attended the Rebecca Yarros panel in Sydney and wrote notes about it, they wrote, quote, Rebecca Yarros didn't always plan for Violet to have 2 dragons. Originally, it was going to be 1, Taryn, and the editor had hoped that she would sway towards a weaker, smaller dragon, and she thought that was a little too close to Abraxas in, is that Throne of Glass? TOG?
Throne of Glass.
Ah,
Abraxas.
there we go. There we go. See, I haven't read that one yet. I'm waiting until we finish this. I have no time outside of the pod right now. And so they compromised and gave her both. She also went on to say she doesn't like overpowered heroines, and since Taryn is extremely powerful, and Darna balanced that out. Now, the person who wrote these notes says, I'm not sure how that works, ? But that's what was said. So that's what I've been referencing. Importantly, I'm not sure whether Rebecca added Andarna after she submitted her synopsis. It's like, I think she's like 8 pages or something like that of like what the plot will be. Or after her first draft. I've been interpreting things as if she added Andarna after and into the second draft, but now I'm not certain. Whichever way does change whether Andarna was written into these scenes after they were first written, or if she was written in to begin with. And I'm starting to lean toward she was written in the whole time to the actual first draft because of, like, think about how much of a role she plays in it, but maybe wasn't in Rebecca's synopsis and initial plot plan. But if she was written in on the second draft, that would have changed the entire storyline for Threshing, since Taryn bonded Violet literally after saving Andarna.
Yeah. I feel like Andarna might have been added after the synopsis, only because, well, first of all, I cannot imagine the story without her.
No.
And if she had already written her entire first draft, can you imagine how heavy of a rewrite that would be for the second draft? It changes everything.
And she only wrote this book in 2.5 months. So I just don't know if there'd have been time to go back and like rewrite. And okay, so you know what? That actually is a really good point. And I think I have settled on she must have meant that she wasn't in the synopsis and that her editor said, please put her in. And then she actually wrote her in. Yep. Okay.
I would love to know the actual answer to that, but that's, I think we kind of agree that has to be what happened.
She was pretty vague about it, but if anyone has watched an interview that knows maybe some more context to this and can confirm or deny that it was just the synopsis, that would be great. So appreciate it. We also had one of our listeners reach out. We love it when you guys do this and ask a really great question. Why did the Empyrean allow Violet to bond 2 dragons? So I went into a deep dive and took you guys with me. General Melgren explains this, saying, quote, while tradition has shown us that there is 1 rider for every dragon, there has never been a case of 2 dragons selecting the same rider, and therefore there is no dragon law against it, he declares. While we riders may not feel as though it is equitable, dragons make their own laws. Both Taryn and Andarna have chosen Violet Sorengale, and so their choice stands. So we're told here that the reason that they allowed it to happen and to stand is because there was no law. And there was no law, likely because there was no reason to think that 2 dragons would ever want to choose to bond to the same rider. Doing so isn't particularly logical from an odds of survival perspective. It seems to me that Taryn did not realize that Andarna was going to bond Violet, so he bonded her, and then Andarna bonded her as well. I still don't understand Taryn's logic, like really just choosing to come out of retirement. Like a lot of those things I don't understand. But regardless, he seemed confident withstanding their decision to both bond Violet, minus the touch of tension in his voice before he leaves, indicating some level of doubt when he leaves to go meet with the council, with the Empyrean, about this decision. But remember, Andarna is a feather tail, And Taryn knows this. So I think this tension and the main focus of the whole Empyrean meeting was way more about whether Andarna would be and should be allowed to bond as a Feathertail than it was about two dragons choosing the same human. Based on what little we know about the Empyrean, they seem to allow dragons much more agency in who they choose. And also, there clearly wasn't even a law that other dragons had to protect Andarna as a Feathertail. Otherwise, Jack and Orin would have been killed, as Tynan was. And Bade never would have been allowed or able to bond Jack. So these laws are just not known to the humans, much less us. We also know that some big, unprecedented decisions are left up to the eldest of the dens to make the final calls. Hence, the line about deference being paid to elders. So, both the conversation about two dragons bonding one human and about allowing a Feathertail to bond were likely both left up to the leaders of the dens. We know that the elders are the oldest dragon in a den, and each breed of dragon has their own den. We think in Fourth Wing that there are only 6, so 6 for 6 breeds of dragons. But we learn in Iron Flame that there are 7, and that Andarna is the only one, or at least the eldest, because we don't know if there are any more eggs, which is a whole nother theory of her den. Therefore, the Empyrean couldn't tell Andarna, as the eldest and leader of her den, that she could not bond Violet, even though Taryn had already bonded her, and even though she is a Feathertail. And while Taryn is not the eldest of his own den, that would be Coda, as Xaden puts it in his point of view, even the Empyrean isn't going to tell the second largest dragon on the continent no when he finally wants to bond. And I assume the same could be said for Coda. I got chills even just saying that out loud again.
Oh, for those of you not watching, my jaw was on the floor that whole time.
I'm not done.
I know. I'm processing and I'm shook. Okay, continue.
No, I love that you had that sort of reaction. It's my favorite part, honestly, is being able to see like if my thoughts actually make sense and if they connect and if they flow like they do in my brain, because I was mind blown by this, but like sometimes I don't know if I'm just like stretching a bit, but here I'm pretty confident in how I'm connecting these pieces. So when we ask why the Empyrean allowed it, because we're made to think that this is the sole reason why they had a meeting allowing two dragons to bond to one rider, we can now infer that it was likely focused on Andarna being a Feathertail and whether that should be allowed rather than whether two dragons can bond the same human. The one thing we can confidently say is that the dragon government seems to give dragons themselves a lot more agency to laws than how humans understand and enforce them, which we also see in how Sgael is described as disregarding the Empyrean laws, which I assume is referring to bonding the direct descendant of her previous rider, which apparently is supposedly a rule or a law, but she still did it, and her decision to do so still stands.
I'm still shook.
I know, I just threw a lot at you.
I know, but some of this stuff Hannah keeps secret from me too, because I don't know a lot of this stuff. And just the fact that Andarna is technically the eldest, that kind of
changes this whole conversation of this council meeting, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That was such a great question from our lovely listener. And it's a question that I had too. And I do agree with you that Taryn probably didn't realize that Andarna was going to bond Violet as well. But the reason of like why it was allowed to stand, oh my gosh.
I don't, you just made me think of something. I don't think that this is in Taryn's nature to do so, or like, I think it would just draw up unneeded problems and there's so much going on. But like, I wonder if Taryn slightly would feel a little gypped from not knowing that Andarna was always planning to bond Violet. Like, he chose that. He went into this, as Rebecca put it, like he was basically in retirement. Like, he took years off. He's an older man, and he's now dealing with this 20-year-old and her drama with the rider that his mates bonded to, and hence connects all of them. Like, so much unnecessary drama and stuff in his life that he didn't have to choose. And like, if his rationale really was he felt like Violet earned bonding a dragon, and then she got to and found out that this whole time it was she'd already was gonna have Andarna no matter what. That's just that's an interesting thought. As you guys can see, my mind just kind of like rabbit holes sometimes, but
yeah.
Thanks for coming along. All right. Another thing I know we have been discussing under the pretense of this whole time that I don't want to take for granted or skip over is the dynamic between dragons and riders in this world. I haven't read, I mentioned this earlier, any other dragon fantasy books, but I do watch House of Dragon. And I really appreciate how the hierarchy between the dragons and humans is such that the human is the pet, as Rebecca herself has put it. It is up to the dragon to choose their rider. The dragon can hear all of the rider's thoughts, but the human can only hear what the dragon allows them. The power comes through the dragon, not the human. The dragons can end their bond at any time, as we know, or at least assume that humans cannot if they're not venom without killing their dragon. The dragons can live if their rider dies. The rider cannot live if their dragon dies. I find all of this so much more fascinating to read as opposed to the other way around. And that it is why the series is called The Empyrean, because the focus is actually on the dragons. We just see it through the eyes of a human.
Oh, yeah. Like I said this earlier too, I have also not read any other dragon fantasy books. I think most of the ones I have read have been more of the Wyvern type thing. Or it's like, at least it wasn't as focused on the dragons like this one is. I also have not seen House of Dragons. Sorry. So like I said, my only other experience is the movie How to Train Your Dragon, which in that one, the dragons are pets. They're portrayed much more as pets. So I love the dynamic and the relationships between the dragons and riders in this world. And I love, because this is something that I had not thought about until you had brought this up previously, that this is called the Empyrean series and the main focus is the dragons. And I think it's something that's so easily missed because of who our narrator is.
Yeah.
And that we are seeing the story through Violet's eyes, and we all have main character syndrome. So we may not realize who this story is actually about.
Yeah, honestly, it wasn't until after I started looking up Fourth Wing content, once I finished the books, that I realized that the series was called The Empyrean. I had no idea. I just heard of it as Fourth Wing. And so when I found out it was The Empyrean, I was like, I didn't even really pay attention to that even being the government's name. My first read. The more I listened to Rebecca's interviews, the more I was like, oh, I think this is going to be like a way bigger plot point. But we're going to come back to that. Basically, I'm really excited to learn more about the dragons and their quote-unquote laws in the coming books because I'm absolutely fascinated by them. Anyways, so much is happening while the Empyrean is deliberating. First, Jack. We get a hint about Jack's motives to turn Venin after threshing, including Violet describing him as staring across the field at Tarn. Even though he just bonded a dragon, his eyes are literally set on Tarn. Then, in the medical station, Professor Kaori tells him that an orange was a good choice. Interesting choice of words from Kaori here, because he's like reframing as if Jack had the power in the situation, which is kind of what you do to deal with a narcissist. And that Bade has had 4 previous riders. This right here tells us that Bade doesn't bond well or deeply. Remember, we're told that dragon bonds are deeper the more powerful the dragon is, hence why Taryn bonded so deeply and hasn't emotionally recovered from his last bond. Yet Bade is fine after losing 4, which I guess we don't really know how many Taryn has had, but this also shows he doesn't pick his humans well. Because he's considered a young dragon, if I'm not mistaken. Where it would make sense if, like, maybe Taryn has had 4, because he's 100 years old. That's a good ratio.
I have been questioning how Jack was even able to bond in the first place.
Yeah.
And now that you bring that up, it makes sense that Bade doesn't bond deeply or just doesn't, maybe he doesn't actually care that much. I don't know. There's no way that Bade can read Jack's thoughts and feel as deeply for him as Taryn does for Violet or some of the other dragons and people that we have met.
Yeah, I agree. I really don't understand this, specifically when it comes to him wanting to kill Antarna. I think I've said that a million times at this point. But where I get the rest and what Rebecca has set up for this was in how it is so normalized that cadets kill off the quote-unquote weakest links. We're told that the dragons value ruthlessness, and when in war, it's an asset to have someone willing to kill. Clearly not all dragons value the same things, but at least some do based off of this. And remember, the Empyrean allows the dragons to decide which side of the war they're on. That means that some side with Navarre, knowing the horrific things that they're letting happen. So the dragons are not unflawed, moral, or pure beings. Each have their own idea of what it takes to guard the veil. And clearly, Bade was super flawed and to some extent thought Jack was going to be the best way for him to do that. Which also brings me to the thought that Bade would have known how deeply disappointed Jack was in Bade's own lack of power. He's in his mind. He knows what Jack is thinking as he's staring across the field at Taryn. He knows what he's thinking when Jack decides to turn Venin, which Rebecca has told us is because he was power hungry and Bade's power wasn't good enough. He knows that whole time he could have unbonded. You know, we wouldn't have a villain in this like juicy detail, but like if this is the logic we're given, the logic points to like Bade is not just somewhat flawed. He's like extremely flawed. He was given so many signs.
It's okay, Bade. We've all ignored the red flags before.
Can't argue with you there.
But you make a super good point that the dragons value different things and have different morals, and not everyone is as pure and lovely as the dragons that have our hearts, even if they're not the most pure.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, that's wild to think about. Unless Jack got immediately like good at shielding, and he didn't, most likely, like Bade just heard it all. Sad.
Maybe, I mean, honestly, like some of the things we point out here are probably like, this is not a diss on Rebecca. It's just kind of the facts. She wrote it in 2.5 months. So there's some things that like a logic we're taking from context from one thing might not actually be appropriately applied in a way that like Rebecca's thought about. Right. So we just are doing the best we can to like think of and investigate like what this world is, because we know so little about the dragons of like, how does this work? And what do we think that Rebecca thinks that they were thinking at this time, you know?
She wrote the first book in the amount of time that you and I have been prepping and recording this podcast.
And I'm over here like we're writing pages in our outline of things we want to talk about. And there's no way she had time to interrogate all of this so deeply. But what she did say the other day that I found fascinating was that Onyx Storm is her favorite of the 3 books. Yeah. And she says she's really had a chance to sit with it, with all of the like strings. She says that she's pulled so many over the 2 books that she's had time to sit and connect all the strings and figure out which ones to keep pulling. So like, as much as it's hard to wait, you know, at what point I read it was 7 months, it's actually going to pay off big time for us, even as readers, like not to mention her health, like needing that time to take care of herself as she writes. But this is going to be like a really high quality book that she has really just spent the time to exist in this world in ways that like we're all trying to do as we wait for it, you know? And it takes a long time. Like we're talking about so many rabbit holes each week, and it's like that lives in her head, you know? So I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to threshing. We get this delicious moment where Jack finds out that Violet is the one Taryn chose. And wow, was this such a fun, satisfying moment to read.
Oh, it was honestly so good. And I love how Professor Kaori was like, dude, you get any closer, he's gonna burn you to the ground.
Same. Honestly, though, something that confuses me about this part right here is why Violet never told Kaori or literally anyone about Jack trying to kill the Feathertail. She says, quote, everyone who needs to know already does. When Kaori asks, is there something you need to tell me? Violet interjects, like Jack is starting to get all flustered and embarrassed or whatever. But like, who is everyone here? Again, why is this not something punishable by the humans or dragons? I do not understand.
I do not understand either. Did she just think that, okay, Andarna is safe now because Taryn would never let anyone hurt her? Or was she just like worried about Jack targeting her more? I have no idea. And it seems like something that she could have just told Professor Kaori.
Yeah. You'd think out of everyone, like, he knows the most about how dragons function. So she had the perfect opportunity there. And it seemed like almost a way for Rebecca to point it out, have someone question it, and then Violet shuts it down and you don't have to go down that topic. Shortly after, Dane pulls Violet to the side and tries to talk her into choosing Andarna, saying she must just choose one.
Hannah, I have tried to not hate Dane. I actually haven't tried that hard, but oh my gosh, Dane is such a know-it-all, and still, after everything Violet has made it through, he's begging her to pick what he thinks is the safe option because he still does not believe in her.
Yeah, the issue is not him not believing in her so much as he has information that she doesn't, and he assumes that that means he knows best. So he already has his mind made up, which, given this info, it was fair to try and do like whatever you can to stop this, because he still thinks she's going to be in a situation where like Xaden was going to kill her. The issue I find with him here is that he made the decision of what the right thing to do is and told her what to do first before giving her the information to like come up with that on her own or like then provide her. So the first thing you should have said was, I know you are processing a lot, but you need to know this info to prepare you and figure out what to do, and then explain it to her, period. And then he could say, maybe you can only choose Andarna so that you're not bonded for life to this man. That is so different from what he did.
It is, and I definitely see what you're saying and agree.
Yeah.
But he also says that since Andarna can't hold a flyer, that maybe she'll be maybe she'll be a professor. So he was like, "Hey, let's not get you out on that battlefield." He's like, "Let's do what's safest." And I just ick.
So you're right. What you're pointing out there is that it's not even just about Xaden in this situation. It was under the guise of that, but he still doesn't believe in her being a writer at all, an actionable writer that gets to go out and do writer things and not just be like the title of writer, but be locked in a classroom. That's fair.
Both things are true at the same time, too. Like,
all right. I really tried there. I know you saw that. And listeners, I hope you felt the effort there. But I think that's a really good point. I didn't. Sorry, Dane. You fucked up.
Yeah.
So anyways, Violet points out that none of this is her choice. Because it's up to the dragons. Like, the fact that even Dane at this point is still, like, thinking that Violet saying anything is going to decide for the dragons. Anyways, then he drops this bombshell that Taryn is mated to Sigale.
Dun, dun, dun. This is the good stuff, and I loved this reveal so much because it's definitely building the tension for the rest of the series.
Oh, yeah. And what a unique way to incorporate forced proximity. And that is next level. And fated mates for the dragons?
And I know fated mates aren't your favorite, but I kind of love it. I'm sure it's different with the dragons being fated mates, but it's just such a good foil for the story. And if you don't know what foil is like the thing that builds up the story or like the layers to the complexities. So it like, because of this, it's leading to this.
Ooh, I love that term. I've never heard that. But I do want to clarify, like I don't actually think I've read a book with fated mates, so I don't know how I feel about it. I assume you might be referencing when we talked about the theory that Xaden was already in love with Violet before they met. My issue with that wasn't like the fated mates part of it, because I think actually them like first love at first sight, because of I actually kind of could see that if written well. Really romantic. Yeah. My issue with that was that it meant that he was in love with this 14-year-old Violet that Brennan knew and would be telling stories about. That's what I didn't like.
Gotcha.
Not the idea that they were fated. Though there is still a chance that they are fated if this whole like prophecy. I don't know how deep the prophecy thing goes. And I wouldn't mind that. But I love the idea of the dragons being fated more and that being used for this sense of forced proximity. And according to Skyfall Scotland on Tumblr, we mentioned earlier, Rebecca Yarros touched on this a bit on the Sydney panel, where she says that she likes the fated mates trope, but she wondered what that would look like if the dragons were the ones mated, not the humans, and the humans couldn't stand each other and were forced to be around each other because of this. So you get fated mates, forced proximity, and enemies to lovers. Like, can I ever read another book that's not those three? I feel like that is incredible use of tropes right there.
I love it.
I find this spin on the trope really cool, but she takes it to the next level with how Tairn bonds so deeply to his riders. So much that he knows Violet will be his last, and he will die when she dies. So it's not just that the two dragons are mated. It's and that they'll be tied together for life in proximity, going to different outposts together and being deployed together. That's forced proximity. But this whole Tairn bonds so deeply, so if Violet dies, all of them could die. That is so next level of the most next levels. So a couple things. First, no wonder he didn't want to bond a new rider, knowing that whichever one he would bond to next would probably be his last. Emotional trauma aside, he will literally die when Violet does. So he's making that decision going into bonding Violet on the field at Threshing that this girl is worth dying with. He made so many monumental decisions in that one moment. I wonder if he even had time to think it through. I wonder if he was like, you know what, let's just do this. Like, I say it all the time. I would love the dragon's perspective, but especially the dragon's perspective on Threshing. Each of them.
And talking to each other, too.
We would get so much information about, like, how we're even interpreting and, like, trying to pull these strands from this whole episode. Rebecca, we'll add it to our list for you. But that's not all. As Xaden explains that because Tairn will bond so deeply to her and is mated so deeply to Sigale, when Violet dies, quote, it sets off a chain of events that potentially ends with me dying too. Holy whoa. Is this a complicated and sort of twisted dynamic?
Oh my gosh. I hadn't heard that interview, so I love that you brought it up because this dynamic is so intense and it raises the stakes for all 5, counting Indarna, of them. I don't know if Indarna would die if Violet did, but could be.
It depends, I guess, on her power or the bond. So, like, General Sorengale was bonded for, I'm assuming, 20 plus years because she had time to have Violet after, right? Or maybe I would say even probably like closer to 30 because of Brennan. So who, regardless, a very long time. Does that then strengthen the emotional depth? Like it's so, again, we don't know a lot about them. Anyways, so I have to point out how this has shifted between the two books. As a fourth wing in most of Iron Flame, the only scenario in which Xaden wouldn't die if Violet did was if Sigale was able to survive losing her mate. Unlikely with them being the strongest bond in centuries. But in Iron Flame, Xaden turns Venom. And this changes everything. Because now Xaden can survive on his own if Sigale dies. This was set up when Jack murdered his dragon Bade, but we will cover that more in depth when we get to that season.
And if Xaden died when he was Venom, is that bond's broken, Sigale won't die.
Taryn has told us that Sigale would only be emotionally inconvenienced if Xaden died. So it was actually like not set up to where it's like the reverse.
Gotcha.
So really, what a lot of responsibility and pressure on Violet. You know?
Really? Yeah.
We've done a lot of deep diving in this. We tried our best to organize it for later, but there's just so much to talk about. So back to it, Xaden steps out of the shadows while Dane and Violet are having this conversation where Dane is trying to convince her. Just Bond and Darna. I'm like so over. Anyways, Dane throws this accusation that Xaden orchestrated this whole thing, and Xaden comes up out of the shadows, which we get confirmation that he was using his shadows to conceal himself from his POV. Who knows how long, but sometime after Dane tells Violet that Taryn and Sigale are mated, because he thinks to himself, in his point of view, that someone must have told her about that. He's referencing it. Anyways, he was eavesdropping on this conversation to some extent. Importantly, Xaden's shields are down. Notable moment here. We've mentioned its symbolism before, but here is an example of how Dane steps in front of Violet between her and Xaden. Rebecca has said that she used this to demonstrate how Xaden supports her rather than stepping in front of her. Xaden specifically notes this, thinking, I almost laugh, but then the asshole puts himself in front of Sorrengail. Like violence actually needs his protection. He didn't see her out there on the field today like I did. Or he wouldn't be hovering like a nanny. I do have to disagree with him here, though. Dane definitely still would be hovering like a nanny, even if he'd seen it.
Even if he saw, yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh. I was living for the way Xaden was thinking about Dane during his entire POV chapter. The petty insults were giving me life. I was reading on the plane and I was actually giggling, and I have read this twice before and it still made me giggle.
Well, wait, you hadn't read chapter 16 though.
I hadn't. Okay, so I guess I hadn't read it twice. Maybe that's why I was like actually giggling so hard. Thank you for pointing that out.
I was waiting for you to bring that up because honestly, I think it might be my favorite chapter of the book because we get so many elements of it.
Yeah. When Xaden mentions that Dane was more infantry than rider, that made so much sense to me. And it kind of made me wonder why he didn't go into infantry, because he's just so much more straight edge and just a rule follower by nature, and the riders are a little bit more lawless.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, you know, the riders are all... There's intentionally a mix of personality of like who is supposed to be a rider versus not. Like nobody thought Violet would be. She was supposed to be a scribe, but then she makes like the ultimate rider. So I think Dane also has a sense about him. I think he would judge. I wouldn't go as far as saying like arrogance like Jack is, but he does have like a semi-false confidence about him that I think leads very well. And you have to remember that he grew up with
Writers.
Violet's whole family who's writers, and then his dad.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, but I do agree that, like, I think that was a perfect insult. But it's interesting to think about because Xaden's dad was infantry. So for him to use that as an insult is a very interesting way for him to frame that and his thinking. But so Violet and Sigale both get onto Xaden about making Dane say he wouldn't break a rule to protect her, as if Xaden did something wrong. And I am sorry, she needed to hear it. Though, again, he has broken rules, taking her up to his room and sharing Dragon Bond secrets. But he says here he would not be willing to break it when it counted the most. Now, giving him credit here, this was a hypothetical, and he may have feared how he would be perceived by anyone overhearing this. He seems to have a very fear-oriented relationship with why he's so attached to not breaking rules. But he valued that and whatever potential consequences of it over just telling Violet that he would break it and not hurting her. And this was setting up, honestly, for his character arc in Iron Flame, where he is put to the test directly in interrogation and breaks every rule in existence to save her. So as much as this was annoying to read, he does have character development on the way.
You mentioned him being like fear-driven with these rules. So I wonder if the rules he is willing to break, they're the ones that will not get him killed. And the ones that will not get Violet killed. He might get reprimanded. They won't end his life because sneaking her into his room, frowned upon. Stepping in during threshing could get him killed. So I don't know. I don't think that makes it any better. But
well, wait. Look at you, Karen, finally like semi saying something positive about Dane. And then you were like, that doesn't mean that's funny. So that's a really fair point of like why she keeps saying like, oh, he's a rule follower, the codex. But like, what is the consequence of taking her up to his room? And what is the consequence of, I would think that sharing Dragon Bond secrets.
That one would be a little bit more rough. Like, I feel like he would get in major trouble. And like, I'm surprised his dragon didn't get very like upset with him for sharing that. But I don't know.
Seems like some of the dragons are more attached to certain things than others.
But back to this specific situation where Xaden calls Dane out, it was rough. And like on one hand, I love that Xaden was calling Dane out, and I agree that Violet needed to hear that, but I hated how Violet had to get hurt in that process.
Yeah.
And we know I don't love Dane because of who he is at this point. You mentioned there's character growth coming. We're not at that point yet, so I feel like I'm allowed to be a little bit harder on Dane until we get to those points.
I think that's fair. I think that's where my perspective on him shifted to. And even knowing what I do now, it's really hard for me to be not super critical of him.
Yeah.
And I think also importantly, this information was so necessary for her to know before their first kiss.
Yeah.
Like it really was something she had to know. And Rebecca's done something that stood out to me a lot more this read is she set up things even within the same chapter of Violet finding out something, experiencing something that will literally switch her decision making, which I guess is writing a book. But that's something that I noticed specifically with this. She had to know that for sure before she could really be confident in her own decision with their first kiss. Yeah, fair. So let's talk, before we get to that, about Xaden's point of view for a moment. We've had lots of comparisons between Violet and Andarna both being small, weak, silver versus golden in this section of chapters. Xaden also compares them. He thinks, quote, not that the golden one isn't cute, but going soft on cute gets you killed out here, which is exactly what makes Sorengale so dangerous for me. He compares how cute they are. Which just, being serious for a moment, really adds a layer of how Xaden looks at Violet in stark contrast to everyone else.
I loved everything about Xaden's point of view, especially during those comparisons. And he's calling out Sigale for Andarna, and then she's calling out him for Violet, and it's a really fun dynamic and back and forth to read.
I'm so confident we're going to get more of this in Xaden's new bonus chapter, and I can't wait. We also have this moment where Xaden expresses that Violet is the last person he would want to be chained to. And Violet feels like her heart's been ripped out of her chest. But when you compare their thoughts in this moment, Xaden in tandem thinks to himself, quote, "In 1 second on that field, my attitude toward violence," he's thinking of her nickname, her endearing nickname, "changed from maybe I'll kill her or maybe I won't to protect her at all costs. And not because she's brilliant, beautiful, or infuriatingly capable of shredding my carefully crafted control. Even though she is absolutely all of those things, no, I had no choice in this. Tarn made my decision for me." The contrast, I just eat up these POVs. So we find out that it wasn't because of who Violet is that he wouldn't want to be bonded her out of anyone else. So much that now Xaden doesn't get to make the decision not to kill her all on his own, which is what he said he used to use to feel like he was a decent person, and thinks all of this while complimenting her in his mind, so far from how Violet perceives this. Contrasting the POVs have become like my favorite thing. It's so fascinating.
Wait, okay. I think I just put something together, because now he doesn't have his measuring scale to know if he's a good person or not, because the choice has been taken from him.
This is what I put together from his last POV, is he says that every day he told Violet this too, he says that every day he wakes up and he actively makes the choice not to kill her because she hasn't done anything wrong. Like, it was her mom. She hasn't. So he's like, this morally gray man is actively making these moral decisions. And he's using that to tell himself, like, because you're doing this, yeah, you can consider yourself like a decent human being. But when Tarn decided to bond Violet, like, if he decides to kill Violet now, he dies himself. So that decision, that thing he was doing and riding off of every single day to make himself feel better, is now stripped away. Which, honestly, like, and psychologically, has got to be a lot to...
Yeah, I don't think I had ever thought about, like, because we know that's what he said, like, before. And I think this just adds so much more to that quote. Oh, she's a genius.
And
Rebecca Yarros is a genius.
I agree. And to the character that Xaden is, and his character. Because sometimes we don't get enough of Xaden's backstory. Or, like, this can just be, like, main characters' love interests in general. And this adds layers to him. And, like, what was he doing through all of this, aside of, like, us just guessing that he hated her? Well, he's actually much more complex than that. And these are the complexities. So, really appreciate that. Another cool moment to contrast was when Violet realizes that Tarn told her to stay with Xaden because he would protect her. She says, quote, "And Tarn thinks you'll play bodyguard. Little does he know just how much you dislike me." Now, Sigale says to Xaden in his POV, he knows exactly how much you dislike her and how often you stare, before Xaden cuts her off and threatens to volunteer for every cold weather mission in existence. So this tells us that Tarn was aware of Xaden and Violet's dynamic, their tension, their enemies to, at this point, he sees it happening, lovers. Before he bonded Violet, he knew how messy this could get. He also knew he could get them all killed by bonding her. He really said, fuck it.
And I kind of love it. Obviously, because it's giving us this story, but I can also just picture Taryn being like, things are kind of quiet. You know what would shake things up? Obviously, that's not what happened, but I think he could have just really saw who she was and decided that she was worth the trouble it could cause.
I mean, honestly, like I had a lot more empathy for Taryn. Like he was just like put in this situation, but no, he knew. This tells us he knew going into it. I love Taryn. He set himself up for this at this point. On the same convo, Sigale responds to Xaden saying rude, as if your inability to control your own hormones should result in my discomfort. Talking about the cold weather missions that he would then volunteer them for. And Xaden thinks, ruthless and vicious as my girl might be, she draws the line at the cold unless we're flying for Arisha. Two things. One, him calling Sigale my girl is absolutely precious. It is quite endearing for such a ruthless duo. And the fact that Sigale hates the cold and is only willing to fly in it to go to Arisha to help the Griffin Flyers defend civilians from Venin shows just how deeply she cares for the cause.
It is so cute and endearing, and I would love to see Xaden as a first year bonding to Sigale for the first time and seeing how their connection grows over time to get to the place of banter that they now have and their back and forth. I also love the point that you just made about Sigale's dedication to the cause, because you're right. It shows how important this cause is going to be and who is on the right side.
I actually think it's quite fascinating because, like, no one talks a dragon into something they don't want to do. And so I'd always kind of wondered, like, what was Sigale's role in this? You know, maybe that is going to come into play with, like, at what point did she and Taryn decide? Because remember, Taryn is the one who won Navarre the rebellion.
Yeah.
Okay. He wasn't going to be on opposite sides of his mate. At what point did they switch sides? And I think we're going to find that out. That's important information. But it shows how much I wonder if Sigale switched first and Taryn second. Or if Taryn found out something when Naolan died, or Naolan's death, or Naolan's circumstances, if he's not actually dead, switched something in Taryn. And he said, absolutely not. Rebecca did not have to say that Taryn won them the rebellion. And that contrast of him, like, now flipping to being fully both of them on the side to support, you know, the revolution. Another thing that we got from this POV of Xaden is Garrick and a Liam mention. I really enjoyed getting to see Xaden interact with Garrick. I know we said this about chapter 9 from his point of view. It just adds so much to our story. Garrick's become a favorite character for me. I believe you as well.
Yeah.
We also get the moment where Xaden decides to assign the favorite character of all favorite characters, Liam, as Violet's bodyguard. This was bittersweet to read because it's like, I love getting to see that moment and how that manifested. But also, this is the moment that Liam's fate was sealed. And that's a hard one. It's a hard one to read.
I love Liam so much, so I can't talk about that right now without getting emotional. But I also love Garrick and the fact that he knows Xaden so well and that he's able to read the emotions on Xaden's face.
Yeah, I really appreciate how much this showed how close they are. And not just like in a like toxic masculinity friendship kind of way, but like they actually were both having serious conversations but also in kind of like jokey, endearing ones, and seemed to be like less than surface level, I think is what I'm getting at. So really appreciate seeing that. Now, this is the moment Xaden does go a bit Dane, and Garrick says, or you could give her a chance to make it on her own first. And Xaden thinks there are a multitude of reasons he might be right, but then he goes on to assign her a bodyguard. Honestly, he does end up being right. He, being Xaden, does end up being right about assigning her a bodyguard. And I think that the big difference is that Xaden still works to train her. while making sure she's protected by a bodyguard, Liam. He consciously acknowledges that there are a lot of reasons that would be the right thing to do. Of course, we aren't in Dane's head, but based on what we know, I don't think he'd be able to see how anyone else might be right as of this point in his character development. So I think that is where I can say I'm being fair.
Honestly, Garrick for the win for his comment. You know, Violet probably does need a little bit of protection, but maybe not as much as these men want her to have. And I appreciate Garrick here because I think that he believes that she can make it, or at least is like, let her try.
I agree with that. And I think it was at least good to point out. It was an important moment because we also didn't know if Xaden had just went full control. You know? And I think that this conversation, again, pointing back to the fact that they're comfortable having that sort of conversation with each other really shows a lot. And it shows that, like, Xaden was considerate and he wasn't just like, I don't care what she has to say. My life is in her hands now. She's going to do whatever I want. It's not how he responded. He's got fair points, basically.
Yeah.
So. This leads us to our Dane kiss. When I tell you, I was scared that this was going in a direction I was not going to like. And then I felt like it gave me whiplash. She thinks delight racing up my spine, and then the thrill is gone in less than a second. But honestly, this scene was needed because it really was a conclusion to the what if in the back of Violet's mind of the love she thought she wanted, and now she knows she doesn't want it anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree. The immediate realization she gets after kissing him is he's definitely not who she wants, and it's super important for her to know, and for us as the readers to understand that there was nothing real between them.
Exactly. And I would like to reemphasize here that Rebecca has said that they were never and were never meant to be a love triangle. She says she hates love triangles, honestly, same, and has said that Dane was used to show the love you think you want when you are young before you grow and find it isn't actually what you want. So it was needed.
Snaps.
And finally, the end of Xaden's chapter was, in 20 years, I don't think I've ever seen you jealous before. This is amazing. Garrick claps his hand on my shoulder. Jealous. That's exactly what this hot, corrosive feeling is, jealousy. And now I'm linked to this woman for the rest of our lives. I need to stay as far away from her as possible. But you won't, Sigale predicts. And I'd be tempted to raise my middle finger if I didn't think she'd bite the damn thing off as a reminder that she can. In this conclusion, these couple of sentences, we get Garrick's humor, Xaden's awareness of his jealousy. He consciously acknowledged that he was jealous. And not like a passive, like, oh, what is that? I don't know what's happening. Like, he says jealousy. And Sigale's accurate foreshadowing of him absolutely not staying away, which sums up why I love this entire chapter so much. It is perfection. I love it. I love it.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Before hopping on over to the Healer's Quadrant, let's take a moment to discuss a couple of these epigraphs. We're going to start with chapter 14.
In the 6 centuries of recorded history of a dragon and rider, there have been hundreds of known cases where a dragon simply cannot emotionally recover from the loss of their bonded riders. This happens when the bond is particularly strong and, in 3 documented cases, has even caused the untimely death of the dragon. Navarre, an unedited history by Colonel Lewis Markham.
So clearly here, we're getting context behind Tairn. This is setting us up for understanding that Tairn was so emotionally bonded that he almost died. And apparently, so like, first of all, let's talk about the fact that it's an unedited history. There's something going on in this unauthorized or unedited thing. And I think maybe Rebecca's point, because she's a history major and she likes to toy with the idea of how history could be rewritten, right? And manipulated. So, like, is the unedited history, like, indicating that before Navarre officially got their hands on it, what about this would not be in an edited? Why does it say unedited? And I don't have answers for you. I don't know what that means. I think we'll maybe get more context as we go through the rest of the book and the next one, but super interesting to think about. But this epigraph makes me wonder what it looks like for the hundreds of dragons who never emotionally recovered from the loss of their rider, but didn't die. Because it says only 3 of them did, as opposed to the hundreds. And we know that Taryn, and this is me just thinking through it on the spot, we know that Taryn didn't emotionally recover, technically, and still hasn't, so why he wasn't going to bond. What are the consequences of our emotionally struggling dragon? Like, what is the significance of that?
They're eating Chunky Monkey, watching P.S. I Love You.
Literally, Taryn could have been like, you know, I say retired, not officially retired, but like he could have. It's so interesting to me, and I wonder.
Well, if they're bonded, he's going to be following Sigale. If he wasn't bonded to Violet, he would just be pretty much going wherever Sigale did, right? Like that would be his retirement, is wherever she is.
That points out another reason why it doesn't make sense, because now he would have had no reason to be separated from Sigale. Yeah. Now, and how we see it play out in Iron Flame, they have to be separated because he bonded Violet. So, like, really, honest, I'm just going to say it doesn't make any sense that Taryn chose to bond Violet. Even the logic that she is a unique writer with the mind of a scribe and that she has this courage of heart, that does not justify the losses that Taryn had to take and the risks that he's now taking that he wouldn't have had to face before. I don't know. Maybe that's getting too much into like storytelling decisions. I'm so glad he did. I'm trying to rush the logic behind it doesn't balance out for me. And I don't really know that we will find out necessarily what it means to not emotionally recover, because we already have Taryn as an example of that, and I can't see how that would play into the books, but it's just something interesting that I thought of. Chapter 16, so we already talked about this one earlier. This is where Professor Kaori explained that we don't really know much about the dragon's government, but I wanted to talk about this part specifically. Quote, I have not been able to discern how it is they make laws for themselves or at what point a dragon decided to bond only one rider rather than go for better odds with 2, Colonel Kaori's Field Guide to Dragonkind. While we know that it was just set precedent that bonding one rider is a tradition and not the rule, setting up that 2 dragons could technically bond one rider, I could also see this setting up for a dragon to bond 2 riders, like in future books. And I wonder what this could look like if one of our main dragons decides to take on another rider aside from Xaden and Violet. I couldn't ever see Taryn doing that, or really Andarna, especially with her like prophetic kind of thing. And Sigale is so picky. I'm not sure I could see her doing it either, but she is super pissed off at Xaden going into Onyx Storm.
Ooh, that's so true. With Andarna becoming full grown, Violet doesn't necessarily need 2 full-grown dragons if somebody needs a dragon.
I really can't see Rebecca taking it in a direction.
Me neither.
But your point too, she doesn't really need 2 full-grown dragons. That is what feeds a lot of the speculation that we may lose Taryn or Andarna.
I can't handle that.
We won't go there for this one. We'll wait on that. That's a whole rabbit hole. But also, Andarna's unbonded. So do we have the chance of another person being linked in Violet's mind through Andarna bonding with someone else? I haven't looked into this too deeply or even enough to know like the whole theory, but there's speculation that Andarna might bond with or mate with Auric's dragon.
Huh.
We're not getting a love triangle. And then there's speculation that he gets romantically involved with Kat because he is the heir to the throne. He's one of them, like, right? Like, he's not the heir, but he's like, yeah. So, like, she could maybe get, or Hayden, which is his brother, that is the heir, and Kat, and maybe, but Hayden's not a writer, so, but that could get so much messier, but at this point, I think we can conclude that Rebecca just loves and enjoys messy. So we really wanted to mix it up. Anyways.
Messy girl.
Now time for our trip to the Healer's Quadrant, taking temperature checks of our characters this week, who was doing pretty hot and who was so not. So I'll start this time. Of course, Violet earned the bond of 2 dragons by defending the defenseless. I have to give it to Taryn and Darna and Sigale, though. The dragon trio takes it for me this week. Taryn and Sigale for caring so deeply for the little golden feathertail and Darna by proxy.
Oh, I love that. Okay, for me, who's hot for me is obviously all of the normies, all the obvious ones. The ones we say every week, they're obviously always here, but I'm going to add in Garrick again because I think I have a crush on him.
Okay, Imogen.
Doesn't she have a crush on Bodhi?
I think it's Garrick.
I think it's Bodhi.
I think it's Garrick. I don't. Garrick.
Okay.
It was Garrick. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll be Imogen.
Yeah. Or that's so cute. It's easy to mix them up. Basically, they're the best friends, right?
Right.
Bodhi is unique in that he's the one that looks like Xaden, but Garrick is the best friend. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay.
And we don't really get a lot of that distinction. A lot of the names, kind of the characters on his end blended for me until we got his POVs. And I was like, oh, this gives him a little more personality. Yeah. You know? So I feel like that was a fair mix up. All right. Who was not so hot for you?
Okay. The obvious answers here are Jack and Tynan, but
You didn't say Dane?
I didn't say Dane.
Yay!
I am giving special mention here to Oren because he was just so weak-minded and easily manipulated, and you could tell that he was unsure about killing Andarna in the first place, but went along with Jack Barlow's plan anyways.
Yeah, I think I'm actually gonna give Oren some grace here and say he's not as bad as Jack and Tynan. They take it for me. Like, they had no reservations about it, but Oren did. But then again, it's kind of like that thing of like, when you are conscious enough to think if something is wrong and then you actively make the decision to still do it, might actually be worse because you are interrogating it. But then, I know it's different, but then that's the same logic I used to say that Xaden wasn't as bad as Dane just a couple minutes ago. So I think I have to back out of that one and say I think I'm going to give Oren grace here.
Yeah, I obviously, Jack and Tynan are bad, but for me, I was just like, come on, you already know that you're not doing the right thing and you're just going to go along with it. That's
fair. On to our favorite moments. Mine this week, when Andarna said her full name and we found out that Violet had bonded 2 dragons. The surprise in that, like, we knew she was going to bond 1. So, like, Taryn showing up, oh my God, it's the black dragon, but, like, she still bonded. But the full she's bonded 2 moment for me, love it. And this is more of a personal moment. Finding out that Taryn was so sassy. I was not expecting that lovely addition, and it just became a moment for me. How about you?
I love that. I think my favorite moment is when Jack runs away after Violet strikes him with a dagger.
Fair.
Sweet justice. Karma.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, you talk all this shit, but then when it really comes down to it, you had 2 guys with you, like, against 1, and at that point, a feathertail that you didn't think could defend itself at all.
Yeah.
And also, he's the one that initiated all of it. He put them all in that situation, and then he runs? Oh.
Yeah. Karma is the guy with the knife running away from me. I don't know.
Because Karma is my boyfriend. Love that. Love that. In this, I think I mentioned it before, but I just have to add it in that I would like to say Xaden's point of view, chapter 16, is my favorite chapter so far and might be for the whole book. I'm holding off, especially now that we're about to get a new POV, and that's likely to be my favorite one, especially if it's the kiss scene, which is Rebecca Yarros' second favorite chapter in the book. Anyways, so I just had to throw that in there. Favorite quotes. You got to throw in just number one for me, this section. Terns, you're bleeding. Stop it. It's like one of the first things he said to her. And that's the moment. That was the moment I was like, I love this character. Then,
love it.
Just because apparently all of my favorite things are about the dragons, the moment with Xaden and Sigale where she thinks, oh, so we're not discussing that you were already moving when Tern landed? That had he not arrived, you'd be guilty of the very thing the Colonel's offspring accuses you of doing. Talking about Dane. Xaden responds, I moved on instinct to protect. She cuts him off and says, let's not embarrass each other by letting you finish that sentence.
Oh my gosh.
The dragon personalities.
So good.
Rebecca did such an excellent job. They could have been boring. Yeah. And instead, they're such unique characters with their own very vibrant personalities.
Well, they could have not been able to speak at all.
Right. We could have literally just been like, oh, a bonded dragon that kind of like, yeah. Fantastic. I just eat it up. Now, my next one was yours, so.
Well, one of mine was also, you're bleeding, stop it, because it was just so good.
It's too good.
But my next one was in Xaden's POV chapter when he sees Dane kiss Violet and he thinks, how fucking dare he kiss the mouth he wouldn't bend a rule to protect when I would. And Sigale says, yes, what would you do? And he thinks, fuck me, what wouldn't I do?
That one I think is my number one. I highlighted the shit out of that paragraph. It's so good.
Oh, it's so good. Got me blushing.
Like, that's not even a direct compliment or even like inherently romantic, but it is. It's the sentiment behind it that just makes it so flustering to read. And I love that because this is why romantasy is where it's at, because you just said quotes from a dragon. Right? And then this human is responding back to a dragon and thinking about his love interest. I don't think I will ever read anything that's not a romantasy anymore. Like, there's so much in this that it's hard to turn away from it, which is why I struggled for so long to get back into reading until I found Fourth Wing. Anyways, time to join our riot as we take flight into our foreshadowing, overarching questions, and theories section. So this is including moments that stood out during the reread and may or may not spiral into theories like I so like to do. First, coming back to our mated pairs, we find out some info about them that led me down some rabbit holes that we haven't gotten to yet. I know we did get to some earlier, but here we are. We find out that mated pairs can't be separated for long or their health diminishes, so they'll always be stationed together. We see this separation factor come into play in Iron Flame, but honestly, I interpreted this playing out more as emotional pain than their health diminishing based on how it was sort of like brushed off in Iron Flame as like, oh, we can't do that to them. And I thought you literally couldn't. I thought you could not actually separate them for that long or XYZ consequence. But then, like, it only was referenced as Tern just being really eager to see Sigale and, like, flying faster. Like, I felt like we would have seen more physical signs or consequences for health diminishing since this was brought up, but we didn't. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I have never read a book that mates being separated actually affected their health. I think I just interpreted it also as an emotional pain that maybe whenever you're super heartbroken or super sad, it can manifest in a physical way.
Yeah,
So,
that's fair. What have you ever read a book where mates being separated was a concept at all, like an issue?
yes, but they didn't have any physical effects. They were just, I mean, it was very emotionally disturbing and it was like they were distraught.
Mm.
But I mean, they were not going to die from not being right beside each other.
Yeah, well, and when I read this and even read Iron Flame, I interpreted it as being emotional. But it was
Hmm.
interesting that they specifically, the quote was, their health diminishes.
Mm,
And so we saw signs of emotional barely, I feel like.
yeah.
But so it was just something that stood out to me this time. I was just like, okay. We are also told frequently that Taryn bonds deeply, so much that losing his previous rider almost killed him. And of course, we know that Violet will be his last because of this. I didn't catch why he bonds so deeply until this reread when Xaden says, quote, Taryn's bonds are so powerful both to mate and rider because he's so powerful. And this makes sense. So the
Mm.
more powerful the dragon, the deeper the bond. And the deeper the bond, the harder it is for the dragon to emotionally recover. I did notice that when everyone refers to Tarn as being one of the largest or most powerful, they specifically say in Navarre. We still haven't really gotten into the dragons at the Orisha Vale, which makes me wonder if they have their own dragon government like the Empyrean. Remember, Violet doesn't know much about the rest of the world, which we see in how Rebecca says that the map will expand with every book. So honestly, there could be many different dragon societies, for lack of a
Ooh.
better word, because you don't know what to call them.
There's other dragons, other places. There has to be a different way of governing them.
We don't have fear for Tarn because we know
Hmm.
he's the second largest, right? But how many dragons that we don't know from other places in this world are his size or bigger?
Wow.
I don't like to think about that. That leads me down like a rabbit hole I don't want to go down.
Yeah,
But it's just, that's interesting.
it is.
So, also, again, something I didn't catch or connect the meaning to until this reread, but Dane says that they are the strongest pair in centuries. Centuries implies that they are the strongest bonded pair currently alive? Question mark. I knew their bond was strong, but I didn't realize it was that strong.
Mm.
I didn't realize it was the strongest in centuries. And this made me think about how in Iron Flame chapter 59, Taryn mentions how another bonded pair has been bonded for decades. They can communicate over much larger distances, whereas Taryn and Sigale are currently limited. Taryn says it will be quote unquote years before he and Sigale will be able to do this when Violet asked. But this was clearly foreshadowing that they will be able to do it at some point between book 3 and 5. Back then, I thought this meant probably closer to book 5 because he says years.
Hmm.
But since I now see that Tarn and Sigale are the strongest bond in centuries, I could absolutely see this setting up for them being able to communicate over larger distances much sooner than that.
Ugh. It is so fun to hear about the details that you notice that I have missed. And I hope we are able to see this soon. And I would think book 3, I'll tell you why. Because I'm thinking that in Onyx Storm, Violet and Xaden, along with their dragons, will be separated by a huge distance because, as we know, Xaden is now Venom, and I think that there will be a separation, and I think Sigale will maybe follow Xaden to keep him safe, and this will kind of force their bond to grow and get stronger and communicate over larger distances, maybe forcing that growth, possibly.
I agree, but I so hope you're wrong. Because at the same time, I'm also aware that there's 5 books and you have to have your characters go through something.
Yeah.
In the meantime, but I find it really frustrating. The distance, it drove me absolutely nuts that Xaden and Violet were separated so much in Iron Flame. She fed us forced proximity perfection and then snatched it away so fast. So if she sets up book 3, which honestly I've heard the theory that like Xaden will be like, oh my god, but I'm dangerous to you, and then go off and whatever. I've also heard a theory that that box that makes them levitate, the venom that they keep him in, that he will somehow go into that thing. I don't know where I saw that. I think I just saw it like passing the other day, and I was like, I don't want to think about that. Because I don't. I really hope that at this point, I know this is romantasy, but I would like the romance intertwined and the issues to be in the fantasy part of the world. I don't mind disagreements, but like this whole like separating them for so long. But in order for us to see them communicate across different distances, they have to be distanced.
Separated.
Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that. And I will also point out that like Sigale is not happy with him. And we also don't know if she stays bonded. She can unbond him. I really hope that's not the case, because then otherwise, like, why bond him to begin with? Why make this whole connection between the 4 just to take it away? But I could be wrong. I hope I'm not. Oh, God. Anyways, interestingly, and I did not catch this on my first 2 rereads, but the humans, even the dragon expert himself, Professor Kaori, seemingly did not know that the dragon's government was called the Empyrean until Violet's threshing. Violet thinks to herself, quote, "The whole Empyrean is a new term for me today. Kaori must be in heaven tonight with all of the dragon politics coming to light."
Huh.
So I guess that doesn't inherently imply that Kaori didn't know, but that's the new dragon politics information, right? So I think that that's what she's saying, is like they didn't even really know the name of their government. Like that's how secretive this was. And, you know, he's the dragon expert. Anyways, this makes me wonder if Violet's dad knew of the name of their government, the Empyrean, and included it in his research. That might not mean a ton, but it would indicate the depth of how much more he was allowed to know by the dragons that he did not share outwardly outside of his research journals.
Oof, I hope we get to see his research.
And if we do, and it says the word Empyrean in it, that will tell us something. That will tell us how close he got. And I'm imagining, honestly, that it will.
Yeah.
As an indicator. Because why else mention, I mean, maybe just to show us that how little they know about it and how secretive the dragons are, but I feel like it'll come back. I'm just putting that into the universe so y'all can check me when we get the research details. Okay, about Xaden and Violet. I found something that seems monumental, and it does get into theory territory.
Give it to me.
It also is a lot of information, so I'll do my best to break it down. Just let me know if it's hard to follow. The moment that Violet comes to terms with the fact that Xaden is not going to kill her, she thinks, "The realization makes my chest tighten, makes me re-examine everything that happened in that field, makes my sense of gravity shift beneath my feet." This reminded me of how Xaden and Violet used the word gravity in Iron Flame. So I looked up every time it was mentioned outside of literal gravity, like when she's falling off of Tarn or something like that. Are you ready?
No.
No, I don't think I'm ready. Okay. First, Violet thinks, he's gravity, pulling me back to him by the force of his existence. All right? Clearly showing that she's attributing this to him. Notably, the next line after this, he responds to something she didn't say out loud. That's sus. Okay. Next, the chapter 31 epigraph from the Book of Brennan, all of this is in Iron Flame, says, everyone thinks most rider cadets die from dragon fire. Truth be told, it's usually gravity that gets us. And this comes back when Vi tells Xaden later that, quote, you're my gravity. Nothing in my world works without you. Gravity, he whispers, a slow, beautiful smile curving his mouth, the one force we can never escape. I'm not even done, and I have chills. I'm scared for what all this means. Okay. Another time, Vi thinks, I locate him within a heartbeat because he's the center of my gravity. Do you see a trend here? Do you see what they're setting up? Then, at the end of Iron Flame, when Vi finds out Xaden is alive before she knows he's Venom, she thinks, thank you, Dune. That's gravity, right? He's enough to keep my feet grounded, to keep the sun rising. She is referring to Xaden as gravity, okay? She is defining him as gravity. Finally, when Xaden is facing the sage general Venom, he thinks, quote, gravity claims me, and I fall, passing my feet and slamming into the ground on my hands and knees. Then the Venom general says, I told you once you'd turn for love, and so you shall. First of all, my original point when I was writing this, and my original thought, was going to be that the moment in this chapter where her sense of gravity shifts when she realizes he's not going to kill her was foreshadowing how they would come to see each other as each other's gravity, which is super romantic. I was not prepared for what I found and what it implies. So after sifting through all of these mentions and the context around them, the info drop about how gravity is what kills riders and how it's the one force they can never escape seems so intentional and ominous.
Yeah.
Like, I thought this was so sweet, and now I'm concerned. Especially because the last time when Xaden thinks gravity claims me and the Venom says, I told you once you'd turn for love and so you shall. This seems symbolic of how Xaden does turn for her for Violet. So literally his gravity claims him. He gives in to becoming a Venom for her.
You know what? I've also seen, and I don't know how true this is, but I've seen that's like one of the theories that that's what Violet's second signet is, which I don't know how gravity could be a signet, but that's just people noticing all of these same things about gravity and then
that it has some significance.
Yeah, and he did that for her, so maybe she is gravity. Wow.
I'm worried this indicates that they will sacrifice their lives for each other, almost like a Romeo and Juliet situation. But Rebecca has clarified that Violet gets her happily ever after. She loves happily ever afters. So, like, I'm not really concerned about that so much as, like, maybe this really was just foreshadowing how they are each other's gravity, and technically becoming Venom is falling. It's not dying, but it is definitely, like, not a good thing. And so, and he does turn, and he does turn for her. I don't know. Past that, I'm scared to speculate more because I think I'm going to leave it at that and let you guys just tell us what you think, because that was a lot. So here's a nice little moment of foreshadowing that isn't going to give you a headache. When Xaden is telling Dane that it was Sigale who called Taryn to help Andarna, Xaden says, "She's never been a fan of bullies." Now, we've talked about this before. This is a reference to how Sigale chose Xaden at his threshing because he defended Garrick from King Tori's son. I really liked how we got this callback to Xaden's threshing during Violet's threshing.
I want to see Xaden's threshing. I want to see how Sigale chose him. Oh, I want to see it so bad.
I think also, like, with this new chapter thing, it's hard because it's just a chapter. We have to calm our expectations, right?
Yeah.
But it would be hard to do in a concise way, but she could do like flashbacks, you know, in a chapter. At this point, like, and I don't want to be like shouting more at her, but I would really love to have these books rewritten in Xaden's perspective if she ever feels like artistically inspired to do that. Because I think there's so much here, and his signet being an Intensic would tell us so much more about our other characters, more than even Violet can. It would add a ton to the story, but that's also a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Stephanie Meyer's Twilight, like she did Midnight Sun how many years later, and it is Twilight from Edward's perspective, who is a mind reader. It makes you hate characters more than you hated them in Twilight. It makes you like characters better than you liked them in Twilight, because you could see what they're actually thinking and see who they are. It took years to do that, but 20 years from now, maybe.
Especially with all of the novellas she could write. She's written a lot of books, so I don't really see her staying on a single series like that.
Yeah.
But she would be set for like just rewriting from his perspective, give it another like 8 years to do that, to have all of it back and then write novellas. And I would love it, but we'll see. We'll have to see.
We're not forcing this. We're not saying we have to have it. We're
just saying how much we would appreciate it if it did.
Yeah, it'd be fun to have.
All right. So now we are at another one. Another mention of these words, these key words that keep standing out, that repeat. So, Xaden's loss of control is directly pointed out multiple times in his chapter, which we saw in his chapter 9 POV, but this one, it's stated repeatedly outwardly. So the first one, Sigale tells him to have some self-control. Second, he thinks, "So much for only slipping, my control just evaporated." Again, not because she's brilliant, beautiful, or infuriatingly capable of shredding my carefully crafted control. Sigale again says, "As if your inability to control your own hormones should result in my discomfort." Okay, that's a lot of emphasis on control. But then this is really demonstrated when he sees Dane kiss Violet. He thinks, "Fire rushes through my veins and shadows spasm around me, distorting my vision for a second. Dane fucking Atos has his mouth on my violence, not mine, but that doesn't stop the knot in my stomach from unfurling, spreading like acid into my system, burning through my chest and making it hard to draw breath." Okay, moment of silence for that paragraph in itself, which I will side note say is a little heated, but I would not, like, if I heard my partner in real life ever say like my violence, that's not attractive to me, but like a book boyfriend, it's different. It's different. So my point with this, and my first thought was, when Kat says to Violet in Iron Flame that Xaden never loses control for anyone, was their sex scenes. But I actually find it so much more invigorating to know that he was losing control when it came to Violet long before that, and in much more sentimental ways, including how Dane wasn't being considerate of her wound on her shoulder, or trying to express to Dane that Violet was defending herself. And then, of course, when he saw them kiss, each of these points that is demonstrated in losing control adds a layer of sentiment and makes it so much more endearing, while still also having like the spicy loss of control layer in Kat's comment. So I had to point that out. I had to point it out.
Yeah. I am also the same. If a man in real life was like mine or whatever, I'd be like, ew, please
Yeah.
leave. But
Ugh.
here I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more. I
Yeah.
love that we get to see this from Xaden's eyes because we get all this context and Garrick's conversation that he isn't actually like that because he says, like, I haven't seen you like this in the 20 years that I've known you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he didn't lose control with Kat because that was not his woman.
Not his house, not his chair, not his woman, but this woman. Anyways, we'll come back to that later season. So we also get this line from Xaden that reads, "My gaze roaming down Sorengale's body. There's absolutely nothing to dislike about what I see. In fact, if Amari herself ever designed a woman with my downfall in mind, well, fuck. Maybe that's exactly what violence is, my downfall." And I don't mean to like put out the fire here that is this spicy excerpt, but the fact that he invokes the god and mentions his downfall when the Venin told him he would turn for love. I'm hoping this was just foreshadowing his downfall as turning for Venin, but it could mean worse. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it.
I hate that. I hate that so much. And I am hoping and manifesting that it was just foreshadowing him turning Venin. I don't think I'd be able to handle the worst.
I wouldn't. Nope. Leave him alone. This is enough. This is traumatic enough for us.
Yep.
You can have Mira, you can have Brennan, you can have who else do I want to throw to the fire? I mean, I would be even willing to give up. I don't want to. Imogen. You can't touch Rhiannon though. Or the dragons. Our core. Look, I think I'm gonna get my heart broken. The chances are it's one of them. Okay. Also, I know everyone tends to think of Xaden for Onyx and what that could mean for him in Onyx Storm, but I want to point out that Xaden describes his bond with Tarn as Onyx as well.
I actually haven't seen much about what people think, like, Onyx Storm, like, what it is or anything.
The speculation on it.
Yeah, I think I haven't really thought of it that much, but I just assumed Onyx, meaning, like, Tarn or Andarna.
Oh, really? So you didn't...
Yeah.
Okay, so I had assumed Xaden at first.
Okay.
Violet describes his eyes as onyx with gold flecks. She repeats it a lot.
Yeah.
But Tarn is considered... The bond is considered onyx.
His eyes, onyx, your eyes change when you turn Venin.
I think it's a rim.
The onyx and then the storm.
I mean, I think of Violet for the storm. I know that that's like, technically her mom was a storm wielder, but Tarn is thunder. She's lightning. So I think it's the trio. I threw a lot at you guys today. Are you doing okay?
No.
Are you good? No? Well, now over to our overarching questions and analysis portion. Let's talk about Xaden's signet. So we're asking each section of chapters when Violet's scalp prickles. And the first time that this happened was on page 162 when Jack's posse is about to attack and Xaden says, "I would strongly recommend you rethink your actions." Violet's scalp prickles. And I assume he's testing if she intends to die to defend Andarna, which seemed, I don't know, obvious to me. So I don't know why he was, I don't know. We don't actually get a ton of context for these moments, enough to know like a specific actionable intention. Like same with the second one on page 190. She feels that after Melgren tells her she can keep both dragons, her mom starts talking, she zones out and feels the prickle. Glancing around the field to Xaden, who holds up a finger to tell her she's target number 1. And I really don't know what intention he's looking for here, aside from maybe like if she intends to take precaution over her being the number 1 target of the unbonded.
I've noticed something about the scalp prickling. And I'm wondering what you think. I'm wondering what our listeners think. So far, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Violet has really only felt the scalp prickling when she isn't looking at Xaden. It's like before she notices him, and then she feels it, and she looks up, and he is staring at her, or he's close by. And it makes me wonder if the scalp prickling is actually when he's reading intentions, or if it's some kind of bond or intuition between the two of them.
I think it's an assumption we've all kind of taken as canon, but I'd have to look and see if Rebecca's ever like said anything about this in an interview that would like confirm for us. I'm convinced though that it is indication of him using his intrinsic signet, because I think it was used to throw in Easter eggs that weren't so obvious, because I did throughout the whole first read of Fourth Wing and even Iron Flame, I thought that the scalp prickles were the bond or her intuition. Yeah. But I did start to notice your point about Violet feels it when she's not looking at him in this section of chapters, because you mentioned it to me last week. So I went back, and there is at least one time, I didn't look at all of them, where they are looking directly in each other's eyes. And she says, he looks at me like he's trying to see through me, and ice prickles my scalp. So that is actually in the tree scene where she caught the marked ones meeting. So yes, while it does seem like the majority are when she hasn't seen him yet, but it's not all. But then I have another thought on this that we'll come back to in just a moment. We also like to consider when we think he uses his intrinsic signet on others, and I would be really fascinated to see if he used it on the trio in the clearing when Violet felt the scalp prickle. What if they did? Though their intentions, again, were loud and clear. I don't think I understand the logic between like the timing of them. But he likely could have been looking at any point for specific moves they were going to make, possibly even seeing Tynan's intention that he knew Violet wouldn't have been prepared for the killing blow that was coming when Xaden, stepped forward to interfere. That's all speculation, though, because we don't know.
Yeah.
But it's like, when would it be logical?
Maybe that chapter part of Threshing is another one that we're going to get.
That's what I'm thinking. We wouldn't really know that unless we got that chapter, but we're going to have so much more context, I think, with this new bonus chapter. Now, we did get another Xaden POV where his shields were up, so we've got to talk about this, because he wasn't using his intrinsic signet, but he added some extra info that like changes a lot. When interjecting Dane's accusation that he interfered with Threshing, he thinks to himself, I slam my mental shields down just like I do every time I'm near anyone, let alone a memory reader. Okay. This complicates the conversation we've been having about what this says about his intrinsic signet's limitations, even more than it already was. As we mentioned in episode 5, with Xaden's POV chapter 9, Rebecca explained in an Entertainment Weekly interview that she intentionally chose these chapters so that Xaden would have his shields up so she wouldn't spoil his second signet for us. This implies that he cannot use that signet when he's shielding. We connected how this would be limiting, because how would he ever use his signet on Dane if he's always shielding near him? But now, that same logic implies that he always has them up around everyone, so when does he get to use his signet? That is so limiting. I don't understand.
I really don't understand either.
So I said to come back to this, on your point about how he frequently uses it on Violet when she hasn't even noticed he's there. This makes me wonder if it's connected to how he says he always shields around everyone. So maybe he's being like cautious and choosy about why and when he risks it. And that's usually from a distance.
Yeah.
We'll have to keep an eye on when Scout prickles if he is near other people or not.
And even in his POV chapters, maybe now that we have Iron Flame and she's giving us more Fourth Wing POV chapters,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we'll be able to keep an eye out for this
Mm-hmm.
in those chapters as well.
I'm so glad we're getting that chapter. Oh, okay.
Oh, me too.
So we also got confirmation that Xaden can use his shadows while he is shielding, which I assumed, but we didn't really know for sure because he couldn't use his powers on the mat in chapter 9. This leads me to think that the limitation with his intrinsic signet is related to the fact that it is a mind power. So why he can't use it while he is shielding.
Now, do you think that he has more limitations with his intrinsic abilities, specifically because he has not been able to practice it as much or get mentored on it? Because if leadership found out, he would be killed, and maybe he just hasn't tested the limitations of it yet, and that's why it's limited while he's shielding?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's a really good point. And it would also give Rebecca an out of sorts if she wanted to eventually have him be able to use it while he's shielding, because again, that really limits her and her ability to have him use it. Honestly, I wonder if this was maybe not as thought out on Rebecca's part and she was thinking solely about like how to cover the secret for these 2 chapters before Iron Flame dropped, but she made a point to add everyone here in this line. Like she didn't have to tell us that he shields around everyone. But that could have also been her covering up for why across the field he was still shielding. So I'm wondering if it just, she didn't think this deeply into how it would limit her later. I'm not sure. But again, that might give it an out. Yeah. Fortunately, we should get more context about this in the new bonus episode in just a few weeks. And I really hope she figures out a way to let him go without his shields. So that way we get to see how he uses it more, what reading intention looks like and what its limitations are, because this will help us so much in the rest of our analysis and deep dive of Fourth Wing, but also our Iron Flame deep dive, which is closer than we think it is. That's crazy. And it'll give us more context to interpret it as we read. So right now we just have to do a bunch of guessing.
So we also look at moments where Dane might be reading memories, and we found 2 moments where Dane touches Violet on her face. But I do want to point out there's also a couple of moments where he touches her not on her face this week. And I want to know, has his power grown from just the face touching yet? We obviously have no idea at this point, but I wanted to mention that specifically because he's holding her hands at one point, and then he's holding her shoulder at another point, and then he hugs her at one point, along with cupping her face, which he does on page 191.
Okay, so a couple parts here. We never we've made the assumption that it might grow, that it could expand, but we don't know for sure if his signet even does expand past the face. And then while you were saying that, I had a thought that, like, one, I still don't think that him even reading her memories from touching her face has happened yet. None of these moments to me have indicated that he has been like surprised by anything. Like I'm looking for context clues to tell me when that could have happened. So either Rebecca Yarros just did not include indications, or it's coming up in future chapters, which we'll be on the lookout for. But what I thought about while you were saying that is the reason we didn't catch it, at least I didn't, when we were reading, is because of how touchy-feely Dane is with Violet in general. Like, that's an aspect to their relationship, is they're very physically, well, he's very physically touchy. I don't know if it's affectionate to her, but I guess that is affection. And so maybe all of, like, the emphasis on just touching in general was just to kind of mix that in there and cover it up so that we weren't, like, it caught me off guard that he keeps cupping her face. So it's a strange way to put it, too. But yes, maybe he has. I've paid less attention to the context clues around, like, anytime he just, like, grabs her or, like, da-da-da.
Yeah.
I still don't think it's happened yet.
Okay, so another thing I have to point out, in Xaden's point of view chapter, he sees Dane's hands are on Violet's face, and he says, no doubt that Dane is reading her memories to see if Xaden interfered. And so it seems like Xaden has already seen his intention to do this in the past and has seen that Dane has had the intent to read her memories. So that could mean that he has accidentally already stole her memories.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from with that. I just think that means that Xaden knows about his signet and assumes the worst of him. I think he just assumes that every chance that Dane has to do it, he is. I don't think it means that Dane has done it. Like, it could have been very easily Xaden figured out about Dane's signet because he went and touched someone and intentionally stole the memories. And then that intention is what flagged to him. And then Xaden's just assumed because, again, he's like constantly shielding really anytime he's near Dane. So he's really not looking for this attention. So there's got to be some point that he figured it out like that. I don't necessarily think that that means he read an intention specific to Violet, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think he just knows that Dane doesn't respect boundaries. So he's like, of course he's stealing her memories. Now, I actually did put a note on this line as well, because as we know, Xaden's shielding, so he isn't reading intentions through this chapter, but it seems like a plot hole for him to not see if Dane actually intended to steal her memories. Like, his hands are over there. He's across the field, right?
Yeah.
Like, stop shielding for a second and use it. But again, if Dane actually intended to steal her memories, Violet does know some of his secrets at this point. And if we have this idea that, like, signets can expand, it doesn't mean it was just his recent memories. I think this does go back to, this is probably not as well thought out as, like, we're thinking it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe he thought that her memories were safe because doesn't Dane have to know specifically what he's looking for? So he wouldn't know
actually,
to look for that.
I recalled that Dane said something about the first time he did it to her and how it was an accident, but I couldn't find it. I was trying to search when we were finishing up this outline. But what I did come across is the person that tells us that it's a search feature is Varish. The context of that is Varish specifically says, try out the new, like, method. Like, he was saying, try out the searching for a keyword. It wasn't those words, but that was the message. This was a new thing that Dane was doing, searching for something. So I really, honestly, after I read that, I was like, wait, so the first time he touches her face that he feels it, honestly, really could have been, like, completely unintentional. It came to him rather than him searching for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I think is actually something that did evolve.
Something else that stood out to me was Rebecca Yarros is a Swiftie. We are Swifties. And, you know, she lays Easter eggs all throughout the books. And Taylor Swift is really big on using numbers that mean a certain amount of days till something, or it's a date, etc., etc. Well, Rebecca Yarros directly says that Violet is the 71st bond. Just throwing this out there, could this be an Easter egg pointing to something in the future? That's definitely probably a stretch, but it's so specific.
I'm proud of you for Easter egging and theorizing. She uses so many numbers everywhere. This is really stretching, but I have noticed that she has a preference for the number 6. I mean, she literally uses it for everything. Maybe the 71, really stretching here, really just like teasing out your theory, is 7 minus 1 is 6. And now you can tell that we really are true Swifties that love to clown. If I was really to stretch here, though, I'd say it was foreshadowing for Endarna being the 7th breed and how that was written incorrectly in Warwick's journal. You know, the 6 and the 1 combined. But then she actually was the 7th. I don't know. I don't really think it means really anything unless we see more instances of 71, which we can look out for.
Maybe it's 7 minus 1, 6, because she is also a reputation girly.
It was an Easter egg for how Onyx Storm was going to be reputation coded. Because she said that. That's what it was. That's what it is, guys. I think if you take anything from this podcast, this was the most meaningful section that's going to tell us the most about... about this series.
So Rebecca Yarros is actually working with Taylor Swift, announcing Reputation Taylor's version.
Yeah. If you guys thought we were Taylor Nation, we're actually Rebecca Nation. She would actually love that. She would love that.
Well,
there we go.
We made it, and that wraps up chapters 13 through 16.
13.
So 13. Taylor-coded. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to join us next week where we will deep dive into chapters 17 through 21. If you are looking for ways to support us so we can continue making high-quality content, please give us a follow on socials, leave us a review, and share to all of your Fourth Wing friends.
As always, we encourage you to email us all of your thoughts, theories, and suggestions. Drop them below if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, or go ahead and join us over on our Discord chat. We will be asking questions about this episode in our theories section because we want to know what you guys have to say.
Yes, please join our Discord. We have some chats going on in there right now where people are telling us their theories. And like Hannah said, we'll be asking questions in there too.
I cannot express how happy it makes my heart to see when we get messages in the theory chat or like people joining. It makes my day because we said this at the beginning, like a lot of the reason that we were motivated to even start this podcast, or that it is what it even is because we wanted to really create this community with you all where we can talk about our deep love for this series that otherwise we don't really have people to talk with and share. And then it just becomes like us bouncing back. And I want to expand that. Like I really want to.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. Until next week, dearest fantasy readers, prepare yourselves to manifest a signet as we continue our journey through the Empyrean series.
We just did that at the same time. That was not planned.